board, or
Sounded really nice.
we could just add a column and have everybody kind of rank it and bring it back.
Well, yeah, I wanted to do something that's a little bit more anonymous, so we're not just sitting there discussing back and forth.
Okay.
I kind of like the Eagles in this.
Lots of eagle somethings. That must be the school's mascot,
Yeah.
I was
right?
gonna say, is that the
Eldorado-
school's
Eldorado
mascot?
Eagles.
Because that popped up a lot.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is that?
Except there are no egos there.
Yeah, well, we think it's.
Just saying.
I have
That's
sort of bias. So we're just gonna wait a couple more minutes for 2 more members to show up.
about Lily's name. It
George
sounds like a
Stackpole
cool
Park.
name.
Stepping
Stepping
Stone.
Stone Park. I like that. That's cute.
Her class also has one.
Oh, do they? It's great that we got so much
what do
participation.
Agendas and then name submissions for the parks. Is that other packet?
I am, and I'm here to learn more about it. Let's discuss how much time it takes to be fully involved.
Well, and we can, once we get going, maybe we kind of can incorporate a little bit of almost like a PROSTAC 101. That way you get questions answered, or we can kind of do it at the end, but I think that those are all good questions to ask and hear from the group a little bit.
Sure,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
sounds good, whatever's easier.
Yeah. I guess it also depends if you want to sit through an entire meeting of business, but you can,
Yeah.
I mean, we can definitely
So,
do
I mean, just to
kind of a
give you
PROSTAC
the
101.
quick on it is, so your only obligation of a member of the committee is this meeting, which is once a month, third Wednesday of the month from roughly 7 to 9:30 is usually what it runs. Outside of that, it's just basically up to you, your interest and your availability. I mean, we usually have a presence at most of the town events like Arbor Day, Chili Fest, the 4th of July pancake breakfast. There's usually a booth that either us, being PROSTAC, or all the committees share. There's 2 other committees plus the Historic Commission in town. So that's really all up to you.
Okay,
Without-
well, that sounds completely doable. That sounds great.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'd love to sit if I can.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
Listen and learn, so.
Yeah.
Did we give you an agenda?
No. And I'll probably.
Corey's gone.
Yeah, Corbett's supposed to be here, but I guess we'll just get started without him.
Hang on to that.
Um,
And then the only other item that we'll kind of discuss is.
But I'm gonna jump
building
ahead in the
park.
agenda,
Okay.
because
Next
I want a
Eldorado
motion
Gateway.
on number
We're doing
1.
a community naming process.
Oh, is it?
Okay.
And so I wanna wait
this
till
group will
Corbett
be
Corbett
responsible
gets
for
here.
That's fine.
vetting that initial list.
So,
Okay.
So those are just the names. that
Unless this
we
is
have
him.
right now.
Okay, thank you.
yep, it is.
There's the man.
Coaching football is the last week.
I know.
So it's, I guess it's like always fun.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to call to order this meeting of PROSTAC, October 19, 2016. Corey Oshner is absent Otherwise, we're all here. So we'll open up with any public comment. No? Okay. So we'll move on to agenda item 1. Actually, have you heard from Chris?
I'm not. I'm not.
Okay. All right, so agenda item 1.
He may be coaching as well.
Yeah.
I know most of our sports are ending up right at 7 o'clock.
So for those of you who didn't attend or I guess it's just attend, because can they watch the board retreats?
I don't know that April 25th one would have been recorded. The agendas and the agenda and maybe some minutes are definitely online.
Okay, so unless you attended the April 2016 board retreat, you probably have not seen the staff presentation for the design concept of the indoor civic space for town center. So we're gonna quickly take a look at that, and at the end I prepared a motion to discuss on whether or not we want to make a recommendation to the board regarding the town center indoor space. So we'll see what staff came up with for the design, and
Yeah.
then we'll go from there.
So as Peter mentioned, staff was tasked earlier this year as part of the board's ongoing discussion, talking about indoor civic space, to start to kind of come up with some conceptual ideas. A couple of parameters around this project that are worth mentioning. The space that we're working with, we, for this study, maxed it out to the full 40,000 square feet. That was just specific to this exercise. That doesn't mean that we need to go all the way to the 40,000 square feet. This also built on a conversation we had with the board in a previous retreat where we were looking more about civic space, not traditional recreation fitness space. So we were starting to look more at the ideas of library, gathering areas, teen areas, senior areas. So not what you would kind of call a typical rec center where you're going to see a jogging track, a weight room, a cardio room. Though, as you'll see, some of those kind of uses, I think, could kind of play into this design. We were working with just a little bit of direction from the board where the town desired a civic space to collaborate, think, interact, share, play, discover, and create. And some of those were kind of buzzwords that we had taken from a couple of library presentations and just kind of some research that we had done and some dialogue with the board. And you'll see down at the bottom on slide 1, we'd also kind of been using that statement at the bottom: the space should complement and not compete with amenities found in neighboring communities. We've had several discussions about, if you're looking at a rec center, you're looking at a library, what can you do to make it unique? What can we make it, what can we do to complement? That way we're filling some gaps that are maybe in the community. We're not going to duplicate a Louisville library. We're not going to duplicate a Louisville senior center. So what I'll kind of do, and it's probably going to take a couple slides to kind of wrap our heads around the orientation, but I'll try to explain a little bit. This black area here, you can generally kind of reference as maybe a street, okay? These gray areas would be blocks within town center. Just generally speaking, we were looking at those kind of promenade blocks as it came down to Park 2. So if you remember kind of the orientation of Park number 2, right next to the creek, this would be close in proximity. Again, nothing final, but if you maybe picture the park here, the street here, that kind of parking loop maybe, or that parking turnaround. So just a little bit of context. And I'll see if I can maybe make this just a touch bigger for us here.
So this isn't actually near town square?
Further north, correct. And again, just assumptions, trying to figure out a place to start. I think ultimately it could kind of be anywhere in that town square. For this exercise, we thought it made sense to have it down closer to the field, but it's probably better just to think of it in terms of like a broad space. Let's see if I can get just a touch bigger. There we go. So working with Barker Rinker CCAT, who's done most of our facility design stuff, we were looking at some primary library features on your main level. And I know it's a little bit hard to see in this kind of presentation here. But you've got some descriptions here and then some kind of number matching up on this side with some images, and let me know if you want me to enlarge them even bigger. But really the plan for this first level would be a nice entryway that led to some kind of creative library space. Not your traditional library stacks, but it could, as you could see kind of in the reference back here, it would have elements of that. We have heard that stacks are still important to people, that people still like to have paper in their hands when they read. But we also recognize there's a huge need for kind of digital and just workspace. So coming up with a creative way on the first floor here to incorporate that. We also thought it would be kind of neat to incorporate in almost a little bit of theater-style seating that could either be used for some kind of formal education or formal presentation, but at the same time could also just kind of be this kickback place where our teens could hang out and do homework. Or if we wanted to do a story time in the park, but it was raining, or we wanted to extend story time in the park concept to do it in the winter, we had kind of a viewing area for that. So you can kind of see that here, and I'll reference that later. And then something else that we learned through this process that was a trend was what they were calling this hoteling space. And the hoteling space is that more open lobby where you kind of walk in and you see people sitting individually with their computers. Maybe you have one or two people around each other just engaging in some kind of discussion. It's a place where you could kind of go and do homework. Let me make sure this isn't one of the... All right, Trustee Anson is on his way from parent-teacher conferences. You can also see that we started to kind of build in your support spaces. I'll be honest, for this exercise, when we were looking at filling most of the square foot, I think that there are some opportunities to limit some of the support spaces. This probably is a little bit heavy on that. We also have stairwells, elevators. But I do think it's always important as we look at the facilities to throw out there the need for staffing components and storage components. We ran into a little bit of that on the pool bubble, where we started looking at a facility and then realized that you have to put staff in there. We also heard a lot about cafe and outdoor patio. So kind of maybe cafe space and then this outdoor patio where you can kind of get that street cafe. We heard that a couple of different times during presentations. Maybe that would be run by a vendor that the town contracts with. I think the thought was you kind of outsource some of those services as much as possible. But then going from level 1, let's see, to level 2, and I have another visual for this later on, you could see maybe a dedicated teen space. So this, again, you'd have your same uses down here, big kind of library area, support areas. This is that patio. This would have been the cafe underneath. But then maybe you have this kind of dedicated learning space up above and kind of this catwalk area with, maybe a room or a homework area up top where the kids could kind of feel free to move around. Not with a great deal of structure, but also not running free-for-all. It would still be a library setting. Some of the comments that we heard about that is there was this kind of open feel, and I'll show that to you guys on a couple more slides, but I do think that there would be some noise concerns. I think either through programming with rules or maybe doing some kind of glass front walls. we could maybe mitigate that. But again, that need to have recognized teen space is something that I think we've heard consistently throughout this process. Now, just visually, this would be that kind of main floor where you'd have your library stacks, kind of your meeting area, your cafe would be here. This would be that kind of dedicated teen area. We were kind of drawing on the influence of maybe like a college study area, but I think there were some valid comments made about, well, if you have, freshmen in high school and they get goofy and they're wanting to kind of run amok, you've got, what should be a pretty quiet space here with kind of a dedicated teen space up here. So maybe this is an area where those glass dividers can come in. So it still feels open, it feels inviting, but there's some noise barrier. And then again, you can kind of see that almost theater style seating where it could be lounge area for some, but then if you needed to do a presentation, you could. Okay, so going up a level, starting to build in those multi-purpose rooms. And what we started with, and I think we've heard consistently, and this is even in the 2014 indoor survey, which did help guide a little bit of this process, is those need for the multi-purpose rooms. Again, just complete transparency. When we were looking at filling the 40,000 square feet, again, I think this is an area where you're starting to see maybe a little bit of overkill on the rooms. This kind of big grand hallway is really just kind of open space. So again, think conceptual, but a wet classroom, art and craft type activities, maybe a basic cooking class, something where we could bring in an art contractor. The library could bring in an art contractor. You could do things with clay. You could do things with watercolors. It wouldn't be as restrictive as maybe what we deal with when we try to bring kids into this room, where it's no food, no drink, that kind of deal. A larger multi-purpose room with some kind of room divider. A lot of the inspiration for this room would have been, our youth leadership kids have always toyed around with the idea of a teen night or a kids night where they actually help facilitate some games for kids in the community. And this is a room that would be probably wooden floor or rubber core flooring, but you can do a ping pong table in there. You could probably do a little bit of a dodgeball game in there. A place where the kids could roughhouse on an active level that was definitely separated by a concrete floor from the library space down below. Also a place where we could work to bring in kids dance classes, adults, aerobics classes, yoga classes, chair aerobics, light core activities for seniors. And then you can also see, maybe we start to incorporate in a kitchen space over on this side, talking about holding larger scale rentals where you can now rent out for weddings, graduation parties, large social gatherings like volunteer appreciation dinner, trustee farewell parties, where now we're forced to really take it out of town, which is always something that we struggle with as staff. We don't want to do a trustee farewell party and have to go to Broomfield to do it. So those would be some of the activities that you could accomplish on this floor. We also talked a lot about this entryway, about being kind of an art gallery or a place where you could have a rotating art element, which is something that we saw quite a bit when we were researching library facilities in Colorado. And then again, some administrative offices. Next level, trying to really fill that need, and keep in mind this is four stories, that need to have big indoor event space. And I think that this draws on a couple of things. One, the desire that we've had to grow beyond typical recreation to provide more art, dance, theater, as well as host large gatherings in town. We do tend to get a lot of requests for, hey, we're a company of 300. We would like to come in and do a half-day education session and then take our employees over to Purple Park or Community Park. And we can get to the point where we can accommodate them at Community Park and say, we would love to have you come out and do, your field day, but we don't really have a place for you and your business to come in and do your education training. We've also been asked if we have spaces in town where somebody can hold a conference, and we don't have those spaces. Larger concerts, instead of canceling a concert in the park or just saying that concerts in the park are a summertime activity, what can we do in an indoor space to accommodate that? So this indoor space allows you to do that. This would be about 250, 300 person room. This would be kind of a dividing point here, but you can kind of gather by the pictures that it's really a flexible space that can accommodate that large number, which we really don't have. We definitely don't have anything for the smaller groups, with the exception of what's going on over at Sports Stable. But we really don't have opportunities for much more than this room, including larger board meetings for that matter. So that was a little bit of the inspiration on this room. We definitely thought it would be cool to make sure we had great views to the west for the mountains. But, if we wanted to hold a formal volunteer appreciation dinner or something, a daddy-daughter dance, this would become that space. And you'd have your kitchen prep areas here, maybe an outdoor patio kind of transition area here, and then a big formal space inside. Community movies, things like that. Again, just some visuals about what it could be in terms of programming. All right, and then kind of just thinking big pie in the sky, knowing that this area is going to have beautiful views to the west. We've also heard a lot about community gardens and community green space and the potential, other than our 5 park parcels, of not really having green space opportunities. So we started to kind of bounce around this idea of a rooftop grass area, something, passive that people can enjoy. You could go up there, check out your book down below, head up to the roof. Again, an opportunity for rentals, an opportunity for the community to kind of gather with outdoor kind of patio space. But again, kind of big picture, just trying to be creative. We know that this needs to be innovative and creative space if it's going to be in the town center. And we thought a rooftop garden or even kind of a farm-to-table type opportunity with the cafe down below might be a cool opportunity to use this space.
Is that real grass?
Yeah, we would do real grass.
So you actually get to mow it?
Yeah.
Irrigated?
Yeah, I'd have an irrigation system and a drainage system. Now, again, a lot of this was kind of pie in the sky, but we had heard in that process, community gardens outside the box, and these, conceptually, I think were some ideas that we had seen as we were looking. We drew a lot of inspiration through that Rhino area downtown, the River North area. But one of the things that we've seen implemented downtown is even rooftop movies in the park, which is kind of it's a great idea. So you can kind of see just a little bit of that feel. And also something to keep in mind with this particular design here is the conversations at the time also discussed a lot of us maybe working with a hotel, us being able to provide opportunities for rental space. So in addition to our residents having access to it, having some features that would draw people into wanting to do activities in town. A little bit on the outside of the building, conceptual. I actually, kind of remembering back to initial comments, I don't think anybody was particularly fond of the design or the color. We were trying to go for a bit of a modern look that would just kind of flow with the town center. My guess is it would probably not look too much like this. The board I think, and design-wise, we would try to pattern it much more consistent with what you would see in the town center. But just that idea of you would have open glass windows, you would have multiple levels of interaction, the street cafe, you know, the kind of green space on the top, the large event space. So it was just a way for us to kind of communicate that in a relatively narrow block space that you could accomplish a significant amount. And again, this is about the 40,000 square feet. At that time, we were looking at maybe taking the board on some tours to look at facilities. These were the primary sources of inspiration. I think there's probably still some level of interest of doing tours, or at least looking these kind of opportunities up online. But this was kind of the culmination. A lot of library space, a lot of, you know, kind of hip, trendy, flexible space, some senior space, some traditional library spaces, some art spaces, kind of all went into the presentation. And that was the presentation that we gave to the board in April of this year.
Okay, thanks, Patrick.
Yep.
So just so everyone has a little background on why we're looking at this now. One thing we're going to do in the next couple months, probably in January, is start reviewing more comprehensively the indoor space survey from last year and work on a recommendation to the board for indoor space based on that. But, I mean, anyone that looks at the preliminary, you know, results of the survey pretty much sees that any such facility that we might recommend it could have community elements, but is really going to lean towards more of a recreation center. So here in Town Center, we have an opportunity to potentially knock out some of the more community spaces, the library, meeting rooms, classrooms, that type of stuff. So then going back to this being in Town Center, on last Monday, the board saw the FDP for Parks 1 and 2. Decided to have the application for those withdrawn over the concerns over the cost and not wanting to necessarily tie the town to the projected about $7 million budget on those two parks. Without really having an understanding of what the total cost of the civic space and parks in Town Center are going to be. But rather than have, my opinion, and I discussed this with Vice Chair Hammerly, is rather than just start going in the Parks 1 and 2 and cutting the budget without a real target number in mind, I think it's a good idea that we encourage the board to get a cost estimate on a facility such as this for the 40,000 square feet of civic space, so that they have an idea of the total projected estimated cost for the parks and civic space in Town Center. We all know that there's this roughly $10 million that, you know, it's a little bit debated about how, you know, whether or not any more money will be available. But right now it's basically $10 million to build out the 4 parks and the indoor space in Town Center. Like I said, Parks 1 and 2 alone were, well, $6 million when you take out the excavation. So $6 million for those. It's going to be about another $2 million for Parks 3 and 4. So you're already at $8 million, and that's not counting indoor space. So we need to, you know, it's my opinion, we need to get a number on the indoor space. So we can discuss this some more, but I also have a proposed motion to get an idea of what I think we should recommend to the board of trying to get a number tied to the indoor space so that we can proceed with discussing the parks further, discussing the indoor space further, but basically look at it as one whole rather than individual pieces. So I don't know if we want to read this now or not, but this is what I have in mind.
So you're looking for a worst and worst case for the maximum cost of the 40,000 square foot facility, so we can, understand that's probably going to be the biggest cost of that and how that plays into the overall 2 million.
Pretty much, because, I mean, as Patrick's saying, this is kind of a pie-in-the-sky facility.
Yeah.
We could for sure go in there and probably knock off 1 or 2 stories of that building and be perfectly happy with it. But why don't we get a cost estimate on the full 40,000 square feet, so we know what that would cost? And then we could, in that discussion, once we have a kind of a total budget, then we could start discussing with some board direction as to, what do we really want to, once we know those individual costs, what do we really want to start cutting? Do we want to start cutting X millions of dollars from the park or X $million from the indoor space? We would have a better idea of what the target is.
How they want to divvy up between the two. And
Exactly.
and which one takes precedence over the other one, if you're going to lean more money towards one or the other.
Exactly.
I think that's asking a lot, because I think that, I am certain the board is a lot further away on determining what will go in 40,000 square feet, if it will even be 40,000 square feet in town center. But you're a lot closer to understanding what will go in Parks 1 and 2. What I would really recommend is get matrix design to first go back to their cost estimate of that and see if they can get that down, leaving the parks the way they are, because there's no question they look great in the design. And let's just say they can come back and the 6 million or 5.8 or whatever that number is for just the parks excluding the excavation, maybe they get that down to 4.5. And then let's see. But I would still, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we did Founders Park and we did the Park on the Hill, before it really came to the board deciding if we're going to move forward with it or not, didn't we go through several iterations of what the costs are and what each amenity is going to cost, and we were able to determine that, we don't really need that because there's no way the board is ever going to approve a $4 million park.
Well, but I think the difference there is Founders Park, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, but there was a budget for that park. And so
the last phase, yeah.
You
there
were
was.
taking stuff in and out of the park to hit a target number. The problem we have right now with Town Center is there is no target number, and I think getting a cost estimate on indoor space is going to help drive the conversation towards what is that target number.
But I think you're going to get arguments, though, from several people that some of these things that could go in this 40,000 square feet, or maybe 20,000 square feet, or 10, or whatever it is, could go in a rec center and
Correct.
be just as useful,
And
but on a different parcel and not in the town center.
correct. But I think the point here is that we're not necessarily saying, put forward an FDP on this design.
Right.
We're saying get a rough cost estimate on a design like this for basically to fill out the 40,000 square feet. So we have an idea, like Corbett correctly said, of what would be basically the maximum that it would cost to build out that 40,000 square feet.
Well, I think that-
And then you can start going down from there.
I think we should be able to get an average cost per floor of something like that, to say, if you're going to build something, it's going to cost you this much per floor. Then you can take that number and say, regardless of what's on the floor, here's the average cost per floor. Now let's trade that. So if we have 10 million, how much, should we consider investing in a facility, regardless of what's in there, a facility versus parks? So now you start having to, okay, is it a 70-30 split or whatever it is? Now you're getting a closer number to what you think you can work towards the park.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Seems to make sense. But
I don't think there's any, by what I'm trying to see us do here, I don't think there's anyone that's really saying we're committed to this design. We're committed to these specific amenities. We just are trying to get a general cost estimate in order to better facilitate the overall conversation of parks and civic space in town center.
And I think the number that we were kind of loosely working with on square footage is about that, that $220 per square foot.
Yeah, because we had a number before, and I thought we determined
Yeah.
that 40,000 square feet was
It
going
was
to cost
a lot.
money.
Yeah, and I can't quite remember which conversation that came in, and we could probably even get a little more accurate numbers from Paul and the finance department based upon the exercises that we've been doing for town hall. But I want to say that we're in that probably 220 to 2.
8.8.
Well, what-
Yeah, that would be.
And I think that was that, and I do remember having the conversation of, you're between the indoor space and just parks and 1 and 2 alone, you've exceeded that number, and then, you're looking at some kind of general fund support or something along those
Well, when
lines.
we did one of the exercises that we did here with indoor space in general, the folks that we brought in were able to give us there were various pieces that we looked at when we were building a building, and they were giving us an estimated cost. For example, if we had a basketball court, they were able, now, obviously, there's no basketball court in here, but they were able to give us some costs on the various components. So if we could sort of puzzle that, even if we were to puzzle it out in a somewhat informal way, from my experience on this committee, we're used to building outdoor parks. Doing indoor space is a very different thing for us. So, I would be reluctant to do any cutting on the other park until I at least had a sense of what this sort of a facility would cost, because maybe what we'd say is, if it's, some massive number, we might say, okay, well, then we really believe that the things that are in the park are a higher priority than the things that are here, or we can cut a couple of floors, but I just have no way to put my head around what this would cost.
Okay, so Sandy, to kind of
There you go.
what you're referencing, and this is a spreadsheet that I had put together when we had very first started the survey working group. Sorry, and I apologize. Let me see if I can kind of. I don't want to minimize it too much because I know it gets really hard to read.
Yeah,
So,
this is what I remember.
And
now.
then the other thing that we need to keep in mind, which I think really kind of came and a little bit out of left field-ish when we heard the developer talk, is the context of when these numbers were put together, and also understanding, and I can absolutely attest to the fact that the construction costs are going through the roof. We saw that on the Eldo Park. We're seeing that on projects that we're trying to bid now. So I think when we look at these, and it probably wouldn't be too hard or expensive for us to get these updated, but got too many computers here. So just kind of a quick recap here. Typical community spaces, probably more traditional to rec center space. Everybody was asked at that time through the public process to break down into teams. You see a team 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can see that those teams were tasked with, okay, team 1, small facility focus. Team 2, maybe undecided, we'll call it a medium. And it goes up. Team 4 is large facility space. And then Team 5, also kind of large facility. And if you guys kind of remember back, we needed to figure out a way to not always be pie in the sky, which tends to be one of the issues that I think we have, because that budget number, we tend to go, we're going to go here and then work backwards. So this was an attempt to tackle all of it. Barker Inc. or CCAT said, here's your recommended general square footage, okay? So if you have even a small rec center, you need about 6,000 square feet. And then here's the cost. Admin space, here's the cost. A digital branch of a library, here's the cost.
So that's
then-
what I was thinking
Yep.
you could do with that building that's there, even if you were to use those numbers
Yep.
and sort of squish them into what that design is, at least it would give us a vague sense of what what we're looking at.
And I think that with that survey working group, and even a little bit from Chris Strapinski, what Chris Strapinski and I started working on is we then took the priorities from the indoor survey and started to kind of compare them to the information from the Barker Rinker CCAT card game. And then you started to be able to say, and then we started looking at our opportunity areas, Impact, Lakeshore, Louisville, Town Center, BVI. And we were at that time trying to take what people were responding to in the survey in terms of their priority and then matching that with the information that we were hearing in the card game. We then, and I know this kind of, we're reaching back here a little bit, when Impact came forward, we started playing around with the numbers and saying, okay, if you remember, Impact threw out that number of, well, we're going to build this facility, maybe you guys take over 14,000 square feet. We said, okay, that's a good place to start. But then immediately we got the questions of, well, why wouldn't we just do our own thing? So then staff, we were able to take the Barker Rinker CCAT card game and say, okay, 14,000 square feet. We knew, okay, weight room, aerobics room, jog walk track, and a little bit of building support plus some admin, $2 million. Well, what if we bumped that up to a medium and we were looking at 24,000 square feet? So let's say we didn't want all 40, but we wanted one floor at Town Center. About $5 million. Now, what if we just wanted to kind of go all in and we wanted close to that 40? But again, it's tough. We keep in mind that these are more recreation specific, not necessarily what I just showed you in terms of library community space. 33, call it 34,000 square feet, about 7, and then here's kind of all your other items that didn't make it in there. So a lot of this information through just the various projects is out there in some form or fashion between the work that we did with BRS or the survey. And then, like I said, what we tried to do, and some of this was really interesting stuff, and some of it didn't go very far, is you had some things that were definitely known in the survey that were very easy to decide. And saying, well, all right, we know the facility priority. And then I included the question, please indicate up to 3 of your household top priorities. Well, we knew that indoor came in at a 69. We also knew per that survey that people were willing to contribute about $28 out of that $100 that they were given theoretically. And then you could start to kind of maybe play a little bit around with the numbers. And then from that, we were able to kind of math ourselves backwards to where you'd come up with the cost per square foot. So weight room cost per square foot is about $300. Full service library cost per square foot would be about $210, all the way up to $400 based upon if we wanted like a pie in the sky.
So I think
Yes, real quick on these, before I lose this thought, these numbers include building a structure from the ground up.
Right.
So
It
that
didn't
includes
include
building costs and all that. So $220 a square foot, our construction costs plus
Right.
modeling it inside, walls and.
Tenant finish.
Okay.
Now, that brings up a really great point, because something that I think at least staff that we've dealt with is at one point there was some discussions of do they build the shell of the building, and we just do the tenant finish, and that was a little bit of a different conversation. And I remember that may have been more of a Randy kind of conversation where he was saying town square, we'll give you 2 floors of that. If you remember kind of the 2-floor conversation, we'd maybe get 3rd, 4th floor. But the shell of the building would be there. We would be dealing more with tenant finish. That would change these numbers a little bit.
There was a brief discussion about the benefits of leasing the space, but that had to do more with workout materials and stuff. So we weren't locked into a long-term commitment that we could get out of in 5 years and move somewhere else. So, sorry, Pete, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so I think the point here is it doesn't, this doesn't need to be an expensive exercise, and staff might determine that they have enough information to already do this. But I think that this committee has an opportunity to try to drive the conversation by making a motion that just kind of, says, hey, board, we would like you to move forward with this, get some type of cost estimate on the indoor space so that we can start having a more informed discussion on the total parks and civic space within town center.
Peter, let me ask you another question about cost of parks and all that, and then differentiating between cost of indoor space. Going back to Founders Park, I'm pretty certain that with PROSTAC, once we started realizing what the costs were of some of the potential costs of some of those amenities in the park, we realized that there's no way this is going to fly with the board.
Mm-hmm.
So I think PROSTAC took it upon themselves to say, okay, here's the Cadillac version, here's the Chevrolet version, and here's the Pinto version, or whatever the terminology was. And because I think there's got to be a point where PROSTAC says, this park absolutely has to have this in it. You cannot have this park without these kind of things in it. These things are great, but perhaps we can do away with it. And as a board member, I would appreciate that kind of direction from PROSTAC that says, and these are things that you can do without board direction, but you're making recommendations that this park really has to have these things in there. So if it's the bleachers that are built in that look natural, there's 100% have to be there, great. Let's put those in there. But if we don't need as much of the sidewalk that's around, okay, then maybe we can cut that.
But again, I'm concerned that we would be cutting stuff without any target in mind. Founders, I believe, had a budget in mind. A good example here is the school parcel park. We really had no budget in mind, and so we came up with that Cadillac version, and it was going to cost like $3 million. And then the board came back and said, well, it can only cost, $1.5 million.
Yeah.
And then we kind of stripped everything out of the park. And then they said, well, no, it could cost $2 million. And so we were able to add a few other things. And then in the end, they said, oh, no, it can cost like 2.7. And kind of last minute, we threw a bunch of amenities back into it.
Yeah.
But that, as much public process as we had on that, and I think we're pretty comfortable that we did a good job of getting the amenities that were most desired into that park. That really was a ping pong match, because there was no budget to begin with, and then it kept changing, and so the park design kept changing.
There was somewhat of a budget,
Yeah.
but what PROSTAC really wanted went over what that budget was.
Yeah.
And then the recommendation was, okay, we really should do this. This is the minimum that we should probably do. And it went over, and it was ended up being approved. But let me ask this: $5.8 million. Is that what the number is, excluding the excavation?
Excluding X.
Yeah.
For 2 parks, how does that break out between the 2? So is Park 1 $2 million and the other is 3.7? So let's compare. If that's the breakdown, is that right? Is it?
Actually,
I-
yeah, I think you have more costs probably built in right now into Park 2 just because of that.
But we don't have a breakout by
Yeah,
park. I mean, the
the
stuff
budget-
that was
No, we
presented
didn't.
to you was all
We can.
was
We
all
didn't,
combined.
we didn't
The
ask
numbers
for
were there. I
that,
think
but
the
the numbers
exercise
are
could be
just
done.
be teasing it out.
So the point is
Yeah.
that, let's just say that Part 2 is 3.7 million. That's excluding the excavation. How much did we spend on the one on the hill that included excavation? About the 3 million, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, as a trustee of the town, I can't imagine that we would spend $3.7 million on just that park the way it sits now. I have a hard time doing that.
I understand your point, Chris, but I still think there's an issue of not having a target number. Because we could say 3.7 million is too expensive, but then what is not too expensive? We still don't know. And even if we said, even if PROSTAC came in and said, oh, we're comfortable with 3 million, we still don't know how that fits into the total puzzle that is town center. 3 million, if the board's target is 10 million, they don't want to pay any additional out of pocket on town center amenities. then
Yeah.
there's no way you could spend $3 million on a single park. So, again, we kind of need to somehow establish a target. And
Was the
My concern
split?
is,
Go, I'm sorry, go ahead, but.
so my concern is that I agree with Peter in the sense that there is horse trading that's going to be going on. And if we're trying to say, this right here is just a means to an end for the board to understand what the cost of the building is, so they can come up with targets, right? But, if you're trying to do horse trading and you're saying, hey, you need to reduce it by $1 million. Okay, well, that's easy. You can look at some of the costs and say, is the big thing's a small thing? How many small things equal a big thing? And how are you going to do that? But if we're way out of the park, and no pun intended there, but we have to reduce it by half, it's a bigger set of cuts that you're doing, and maybe you said, well, I was going to do these two small ones could equal a big one. Well, now I have to actually do this big one and something else. It's that eliminates certain parts of the equation when you're trying to figure out what stays, what goes, or how to adjust it. When you kind of have a cost target. So,
And I think the other point that feeds into this is that park is going to be the first thing that anybody sees when they drive into the town of Superior. And so I think we feel we have an additional obligation to make sure that we've got a showcase park. But in order to make trade-offs, we need to understand what else is the money going to go to, and so how do we objectively say, okay, these are the things we need the most in that park to make it a showcase and also make the indoor civic space. So I really very strongly believe we need to have a sense of both in order for us to make a real, true, and honest recommendation.
So what do you think is the minimum, though, at that park, to put in that park, that's going to make it, or keep it that showcase park that we're talking about? Because it doesn't, at this point, it doesn't matter if the board comes up with a desired amount to spend. Because what if the board says, okay, you can spend $2.5 million on that park, but you can't get the desired showcase park at $2.5 million? Are you going to say, okay, then we'll just spend up to $2 million, $2.5 million? Or are you going to recommend that, no, if you spend $3 million, you can get this showcase park? So that's my point, is maybe we can be proactive. The fear is that we're going to be bogged down with now trying to figure out what we're going to put in 40,000 square feet, or identifying if it's 20,000 or 15. And I think these things are going to be stretched out, like the indoor needs survey. Big expectations with that. We got all this data, and we're expecting to come up with a determination of whether we could put some rec space in the town. And we haven't done anything with it. And I think that's what's going to happen with this, is that we're going to say, well, let's wait and see what the board decides on the indoor space. And I think it's going to get bogged down. We're not going to get anything accomplished.
Well,
I'll tell you, looking at the numbers there, that, one of the things that I was kind of thinking during this is, in the medium-sized space, which is halfway, some large space, small space, it's about $5 million, which is about half of the $10 million. So, is it possible for us to go in with the assumption that it's going to be split equally for, we'll say, let's go with the assumption, 50% park, 50% building. What does that do to the park? And maybe we start negotiations there and say, well, if we just skewed it this way a little bit, then you can get that showcase park. Let's go in with something to say, what does that do to us as our starting point, and where do we want to go from there? Does that make sense?
Well,
How do you handle public comment?
well, just to quickly answer, we do know that it's at least a 40-60 split. $4 million has to be spent on the parks, correct? At the outdoor parks, a minimum of $4 million.
I still argue that we could.
That I believe is in the agreement, that we have to spend at least the $4 million. And then the 6 is the more negotiable piece. That could be spent on indoor civic space, or it could be spent on a combination of indoor civic space and parks.
So we can make an assumption.
So,
50.
Sandy,
Point
your
of
comment.
clarification, it's $4 million on all the parks.
Correct.
And
Correct.
not just-
Yeah, all the
And
parks.
we've already got
800,000 of it chewed up.
Yeah, you already have, it's a million. $1 million is on 3 and 4
Yeah, but
already.
he estimated the price to go up, so it's going to be closer to 800,000 than when he gets all done, based on what he said the other
And
night.
something to just keep in mind, and this is more just thought process-based is, and I don't remember, I don't remember who said it on the board, but I think everybody knows at some point that 10 million reaches a cap. There's other things like phasing that could be looked at. There's also long-term capital fund spending and prioritization. So I think that are just some way we can go back to Matrix and say, hey, maybe you give us the complete slimmed down version, and we start to eliminate, some of the walkways, or we come back with a small, medium, and large, which I think is probably what Chris is referring to on Founders. And then maybe one of those is a $4 million version or a $3 million version, and we come up with something in between, and then we've got the pie in the sky. And you could do the same with the facility.
I still think that it's premature to start cutting from the parks without having some type of target number in mind. And I think we need to get a target somehow, and I think this is one way to possibly try to get that target. I don't see this as being a commitment to anything specific in the space. I don't think, to answer the concerns over like the indoor space survey that we're going to look at, I don't think we're necessarily going to say, oh, this is definitely going in town center, so we're not going to talk about it being in a separate facility outside of town center. I don't see that type of issue coming up. I see this more as just one way to drive at getting an indoor space number so that we know, like, what is the kind of maximum cost that we might spend in town center on everything, and then we can start whittling down to get that to where the board wants us to be.
Maybe to be of help, Patrick, you guys did the exercise for the budget process of what it would talk to put town hall in Superior Town Center. How many feet did that include?
We had all the way. We kind of did the small, medium, and large, and Martin and I would have those numbers somewhere.
Those are sort of more current than these?
Same process, but I think
process, but more current and not tailored to the specific
to the
amenities. But you've got a framework, a current framework, maybe to facilitate this. So I wanted to throw that out. And Chris, what's your opinion? How will the board actually, the pregnant question on the board at the tail end was the same exact dilemma. How much do we expect everything to cost over and above that 10 million? Or can we fit it all into 10 million? That was sort of where that conversation was going at the very end. So the question is, if the board's going to have to go down this pike anyway, the board may welcome this sort of process. And maybe it's as simple as going back to the board with this concept that's being floated here and saying, hey, is it worth at this time to you guys to pursue this avenue of trying to anticipate what total civic and total park costs might come in at to help create a realistic goal. And then that ultimate question is going to be, if it's more than 10, how much is the town going to fund? So we may end up as a board at along the same lines of discussion here. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think that the process to determine what's going to go in the indoor type space in the town center is going to be a very lengthy process. And we're going to depend on a lot of, like I said, the results from the survey and the discussions that PROSTAC's going to undertake over the next year. And it's not going to be an easy thing. That's why I say it's much easier to determine what's going to go in the parks. And I think as a board member, I would appreciate seeing, like we did with Founders Park, that we saw, here's what you get for this amount, because it gives us an idea, it gives us a more of a vision of what is possible. And I think every park the two parks that we've had these discussions on, we've seen the options of option A, B, and C, A being all-inclusive, C being bare bones. We got to see what those cost and then start trading off things. And then we were able to better determine how those parks are going to be finished off. And I agree with Sandy Hammerly, that on Park 2 especially, that's like the flagship thing that people see when they come in, so it should be nice. So I'd like to see what those different costs would be before we really go talk about what's going to be in the town center, because I have no idea. I don't think any of us have any idea on that. We're so far off from that. So I think the easier decision is what's going to happen in Parks 1 and 2.
Well,
I think we're this close. I really do think we're close.
On Parks 1 and 2.
Parks 1 and 2.
But Park 4, how far out is that? Parcel 4?
Park 4 is.
It's
Park
done.
4 is approved.
Park 4 is approved.
Done.
FTP done, ready to go.
FTP done.
It's done.
Park 3 that we
Totally.
really don't know, but we're paying 20% of that.
Well, and the curious thing is, the developer was referring to the town's part of Park 3 as costing $400,000 in that last board meeting, which means that would be a $2 million park. Patrick doesn't even know where that number is coming from. The developer seems to have some type of cost attached to Park 3 that no one has
Things that
seen.
would go in there, and I can't remember what they were. I forget.
Not-
We had the really, I think we
We-
had, at that time it was, the developer had that really kind of squared linear court here.
And it was
And then
tiered, wasn't it?
It was tiered, and then
Yeah.
we kind of came back and said, no, if you're really going to suit the town's need, it needs to flow a
Yeah.
little bit. Remember, we said, why
There
don't you
was
put
never
in
a design
four
concept
days?
that was agreed on by both the town and the developer.
And we
On
only get
three.
20%.
On 3.
The
Yeah.
developer agrees.
Exactly.
The developer-
But what I'm saying is, it sounds like the developer
Well-
has a park in mind
Oh,
that
yeah.
they have costs attached to that I don't think anyone in town has seen.
Well, and I think they ended up coming around to our park,
Yeah.
but that was specific to they were trying to court certain builders, which I don't know if those home builders are still on the table
But
or not.
that's
I would
a-
almost consider Park 3 still being,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a tangent at this point, but I think they were saying the town's part is 400,000, but I think that's still an unknown.
Well, so what happens when they come to us on Park 3 and they say, here's what it's going to cost, and we say, we can't afford to pay our 20%? What happens?
yeah. No,
Because what if we decide we want to put $4 million in parcel 1,
Yeah.
$1 million in parcel, or 2, and then $1 million in parcel 1, and then we want to do $5 million in the town square with this, what we're seeing here. We have nothing left. I mean, how do we handle that?
I think then it comes to that, then you
We
start
got
looking at
lawyers
does
for
the
it.
general fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if it's interesting, we talked about this.
Well, or they
staff.
void the 80/20 deal, and they say they're not going to pay anything, and the town's stuck paying whatever
Right.
it's going to cost.
I mean, if you look at the sheer task of, we'll throw out the little parcel number 5, which was kind of that out parcel. So if you're talking about 4 parks plus indoor space, I mean, 10 million, as staff, I never assumed that it would all be covered under that.
Mhm.
Because it's just not how, if you look at just our projects, you look at Founders, which is a great park, but it's fairly bare bones at $1 million. You look at what we're putting in now, which is going to be close to $3 million. I mean, so I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Do we start to say, okay, here's what you have out of the 10 million, and then to get here, this is what we're going to go back to the board in the future and ask for general fund?
I think that's the ultimate
'Cause you can't
end
do-
of this conversation.
Yeah, no matter what, you can't do 4 parks plus indoor space for 10
For
million.
$10 million
bucks.
dollars.
It's a portion of the cost. It's just then prioritizing where you want that to go.
Well, the other dilemma that I have if we were to look at the cost materials that were presented to the board the other night, it breaks down trees and things, but it doesn't really tell me, if we want, I couldn't do anything with what we've got here right now because it's more of a, you don't even see the word great big competitive field on there. So we don't know what that field costs. We can see what the lights would cost on that field. So it's hard for us to even make any decisions based on what's there, because.
And we can ask them for that, for
Yeah,
sure.
but I mean, for me, right now, I don't have enough information that I could cut anything anyway, because I see a great big field, but maybe I would say, well, maybe we scale the field back, and that saves us some money. Or we say, I mean, but in order for me to start
Yeah.
saying I can make this smaller, I need to have some sort of a
Because
sense
it says,
of
like-
what's going to happen with indoors, so we can
Yeah.
weigh things back and forth and at least give you guys what we think is a reasonable estimate based on the information that we also have available to us through the indoor survey of needs that we want to, so.
I think what we can help them the best is, and first I'll start by saying, I kind of disagree with part of this in the sense that I think we have the information that we need. We have all the information of all of those different facilities, and you can see what like Chris was saying, is that we don't know what's going to go in there, but you can figure out what an average for square foot is, and say, you can go back to the board and say, just what we have, that, a 2,500 square foot, 25,000 square foot facility is going to be about this much. That means this much for parks. If we have this much for parks, this is what, essentially you're going to be giving up, and you're not really going to give anything that you really want. We can give them an impact assessment of, if you're really trying to budget all this on $10 million and you want to have some kind of decent facility, a medium-sized facility, you're going to be spending $5 million in that facility, roughly, 25,000 square foot, doing the 220 math, plus or minus a little bit. That gives us $5 million for 4 parks. This is what you're going to get. Is this really what you're looking for on this $10 million? You give them an impact assessment to say, this is really not going to cut it. We need to reevaluate the $10 million or the facility itself. And that's kind of where they can start their discussions and start their conversations. But instead of saying, let's do this, and so we get more data, which I think we already have, because I really, when you're going to start thumbing it anyways afterwards, you say, well, we don't know what's going to go in there. They can tell us what this facility full up is, but after that, you're going to be making some assumptions. So you're going to be kind of getting it's close to it. I think we have that number already. And so we can.
And I think all this, I don't think this is really asking if this could basically just get staff to say, oh, we have enough information to answer this motion. I don't think this is necessarily asking for a lengthy process and to get there. But I mean, if anyone can think of a way to better word this or reword it or scrap it all together and come up with a different motion, I think that's where I think our conversation tonight is at that point. We need to either make a motion or not. And so if this is the right motion, I don't know.
My first thought on it would be, do we need a motion?
Well, yeah, we could decide not to make a
No, I'm just
motion.
saying, that would be,
Yeah.
that's where we need to start. I think before we waste our time discussing what should be in it, do we need it? Or putting this information in our notes that go back to the board going to be enough to instigate the board to say, well, maybe we need to get back to them and say, we need something.
No.
We need something from them.
Ron, I can't hear. Do you have that turned on?
Did I?
Yeah. So I guess a quick show of hands, who thinks that we have enough information captured, enough information will be captured in our notes to make our point tonight? And then the other side of this would be who feels that we need to make a motion tonight. So first, show of hands of who thinks we have enough captured in the notes. Just Corbett. And so who thinks we need to make a motion?
I would refer to the trustee Hanson on this to see what your opinion is.
Opinion of,
Do you see the value of us putting through a quick motion on something similar to this? Maybe not exactly this.
no.
Or are we stepping over our bounds of?
No, you're not stepping, no, I think
Yeah.
you guys need to take control and.
Well, generally it works the other way. You guys tell us,
Well,
we'd
but-
like to see this.
But not necessarily, and I'll go back to the park where we did the 3 parks, or what is now Autry Park, that PROSTAC actually took the initiative to say, no, we want to do it like this, and here's what we want. We came back to the board, because it was actually going down a different path, and PROSTAC's recommendation was accepted. So you guys do have a lot of I think, a lot of influence on the board. That's why I say, this here is you're just putting it off. And I hate using the term because it's very cliche, kicking the can down the road. I think that that's what's happening here. I think that you guys could take the initiative and really focus on the parks first, and then the indoor space. Because I think the indoor space is gonna take a long time to determine that.
Especially since we're not even sure.
See, I disagree that we're kicking the can down the road. I think we're actually pulling the issue up into the current discussion, and that we're not trying to bog down, we're not trying to advance the process on the indoor space. We're just trying to get a picture of total cost so that we can be more informed in discussing the parks.
So can we just ask for that? Can we just say, based on the information that the town has on what facility space costs, can we get an estimate for what the parks should be in town center? I mean, can we literally ask the question that we want the answer to?
You're saying the civic space.
Yeah.
The cost of the civic space.
The cost of the civic space, given that.
Civic space being the parks or the indoor space?
Indoor civic space.
The indoor, given the fact that the town already has information on what generic civic space costs, can you use that and give the PROSTAC an estimate or a target cost for the park space? Can we ask the question that we want the answer to?
I'm gonna say no, because I have no idea what we're gonna put in the indoor space.
But how can you ask us to make a recommendation on a park and just say, just start cutting stuff out of parks 1 and 2? Maybe what we say is, we think this park has to stay exactly the way it is.
Perfect.
And
Good.
And we don't want to cut anything, so you guys are going to have to figure out, whether that's not what you want to have happen. But if we believe strongly in this
Yeah.
park, we stay right where we are.
I think that's perfectly fine, and that's actually what I need. If you guys absolutely believe those two parks are worth $5.8 million and 100% certainty they should stay the way they are, that's the recommendation. I think that's fine. Personally, as a board member, though, I think it's too much.
Well, yeah, and I think it's, in the context of the overall town center discussion, we know that that's too much. At the same time, we have no context at this point to know what our budget is, what our target is. And therefore, anything for us to say, this park should cost $4 million, or to make cuts to get it down, it would be an arbitrary exercise.
That's fine.
And that's my concern, is if we just start doing something now without some idea of cost of indoor space, we're basing it on little to no information. And we might make cuts that still end up costing too much in the end, because we don't know what the total
I mean, what if you
goal.
were to if the trustees were to just take the $10 million and say, okay, this is our best guess of how we want you to spend this money. We absolutely want $4 million set aside for civic space, and the other $6 million goes to parks, and you guys get to recommend how to do it, and 600,000 of it's gone. It's already spent, we've committed it, it's too late. So you now have $4.6 million, or whatever it happens to be. Or you say, hey, we're thinking indoor spaces, $250,000. At least you give us something to work with, so we know a little bit better how all these parks would fit together.
So I'm going to just go ahead and make a motion, a shorter motion of this, basically what Corbett said. Based on existing information, PROSTAC requests that the board and staff put together a proposal on rough or general cost of an indoor space facility in town center, generally based on the presentation from April 25th, 2016. That's a simple motion. So, discussion?
Can we flip that around? Because if you're asking for I'm getting closer for you. if you're asking for the cost of indoor, the estimate of indoor space, so you can subtract that from the 10 to get the estimate of the park, why not just ask for the estimate of the park?
Well, we already have cost estimates on the parks.
No, the estimate of what we should spend on the park, what they think it's just flipping the question around. If
Yeah.
you're saying, hey, do this and we'll subtract it from the 10 and come up with a number, just come up with a number.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, is without them having some clue as to what the indoor space is going to cost, how are they going to come up with a number
Well, yeah.
on the parks?
No, I'm saying they can come up with that number and they can come up with a number of the indoor space and then give us the number of what the park should be. Instead of having us do the math and say, well, okay, this is what we're going to assume, we're going to assume the difference of this, just tell us what that number is. Be more direct.
When do you think that the board would make a decision on the indoor component there?
I'm not
The reason I
expecting
ask
any
is that-
decision to be made anytime soon.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying we just need a rough cost. And with no decisions, there
Well-
would be no decision tied to that.
Because we haven't even decided if it's going to be 50 square feet or 40,000 square feet.
Exactly.
Somewhere in between. So,
But until you have, I think you have a better understanding of what 20,000 square feet, 30,000 feet, 40,000
I would-
square feet is
you
going to
can,
cost.
as of right now, I would definitely say that the $230 a square foot is the number to work with.
So I
And
would,
back to kind of
But
Sandy's
again,
point.
we don't know the size of the space they're
Yeah.
talking about. So you go $220 a foot times 40,000 square feet, you eat up a big chunk of the change that we've got
8.8
available to us.
million.
Right.
So
See
it
if
doesn't
we-
really do us any good to have a number if we don't have a sense of what the board is thinking they
But
want to put in
the
there.
recommendation was
Patrick,
just,
Can we think about it a little differently? Remember at the end of the
Sure.
board meeting, I raised the point that I felt the school parcel, it was that ping pong, that we unnecessarily cut because there was such a disparity between the construction costs and what the first crack was. And the construction costs were like 25% lower than the rough numbers thrown at it. So, PROSTAC or board, whoever pulled out amenities, did so really unnecessarily. So at the tail end of the board meeting, I asked, let's get construction costs on this 5.8 million. Because if you use that same 20% factor, or even 25% factor, then for those two parks, you're down to 4-point-something million, right? Once you have that number, the board may well say, well, even adding in the 800,000, was it for grading?
no,
Right?
1.7 million.
yeah, it was almost.
1.6, yes.
Well, whatever. Maybe we'll tolerate somewhere in the 4 million range for those two parks, because they're that important to the placemaking there. And maybe, just maybe, this whole exercise is unnecessary for you guys to cut out. So it seems to me like maybe if you can get Matrix to come up with those construction estimates, which that gentleman, that Mike
Mhm.
said, we can get that pretty quickly.
Yeah, they're doing it.
Well, and we're getting pricing from them to do that piece of it. Because I will say, and I mentioned this we're very far away from construction documents. This was an FDP level with FDP engineering, we call it an engineering swag or an engineer's cost. So we're getting pricing from Matrix right now to take us to construction drawings so we can get construction costs. That, I think, is gonna be fairly expensive for us to go from what would be an FTP to construction drawings. So, but they can do it. Timeframe wise, it's gonna take us, that's what we're trying to figure out, is how quick can they, plus we've asked them to create a new FDP for the creek, which has a timeline on it. So this may kind of bleed into a next year item and may cost us a little bit of money to get there, but it may be worth investing the money to get there to then have the information available.
So in your experience, build all these parks, what is the variance between what that quick, the basically, when you're piecing that cost together, it seems like that's the high, to me.
Right.
5.8 million plus grading is the high. And then when you actually get the synergies of the project being built out, it comes in somewhere under that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Is there sort of a standard factor that seems to be, is it 10%, is it 15, is it 20? Or does it depend on the company who's doing the original
Well,
estimation or what?
yeah, and I think a couple of things that come into factor on this part is, you know, we did tell them to go pie in the sky, so everything is all in. You know, we were at 700 and some thousand just on that restroom and concessions building. You eliminate that or cut that down, that could go away. You start looking at grass seed as opposed to sod, another 300,000 to 400,000 could come off. So I think that there were some changes that Ian and I were bouncing around in the meeting that could probably bring that down
So,
quite a bit. But it's, yeah, I mean, I think we could, if you take our most current park that we're building at about 3 million, and kind of look at the comparative features, I don't think that those guys were all that far off. I think they're accurate, but they were accurately pricing a really high-end, really expensive park because that's the direction that we
But-
gave them.
but
So-
Patrick, the math said that Cadillac Eldorado came in at 4 million. That's
Mhm.
what design concepts or whoever
Mhm.
applied those numbers. There was a 25% variance in the final numbers, so 25% of 4 million is 1 million. That alone, with no changes
Mhm.
and those wonderful features that were envisioned, would have brought us down to 3 million, which is right where we're at.
Right, yeah.
After having decimated that original vision and added back in, and we're still back at the 3 million.
Mhm.
So my whole point in the board meeting was don't prematurely decimate the vision,
Mhm.
because you may not have to if the costs when they come in are 20-25% lower. Right?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful park, but the fact is it's not that original super magnificent thing that people call the Cadillac, which it appears we could have.
Mhm.
well, all right, so I'm going to withdraw my motion, and I think we're going to table this discussion. You should have enough captured in the notes to get the points that we're trying to make. I will ask that if staff can get the more detailed Parks 1 and 2 costs, so that if we choose to make an exercise of suggesting cuts to Parks 1 and 2, we can actually see the individual amenities and not these commingled costs that were in the board packet, as well as if it's possible to get some of what you were just talking about, cost of sod versus seed, cost of, Cadillac versus Chevrolet restroom, as, to use Chris's terminology. So
Pinto, I said Pinto.
the Chevrolet was the middle
And those
one,
are
right?
expensive.
I don't think we're going with
Chevrolet's
Pinto,
middle,
because that's like outhouse, so. So yeah, if we can get like a little bit more information to maybe, again, better inform a discussion on Parks 1 and 2, that would be great. But we'll table the discussion on the indoor space.
I will say that the cost estimates on like the turf, it's like am I seeing that correctly? $250,000 that would be the playable surface, the playable surface in Park 1.
From the get-go.
So to me, that's an insignificant cost compared to the total.
Yeah.
The big costs are like the seating area, right?
Yeah.
We need to have that
Well, but
seating area,
again,
that's over $1 million.
it says, doesn't that say like retaining walls? Is that
Yes.
referring only to the seating area, or is that retaining walls throughout entire Parks 1 and 2?
Well,
That's
there-
what we need to get a better
Yeah, that's
understanding
right.
of.
There's retaining walls, concrete bleachers, stairs, and then guardrail and handrail.
Yeah, so we need to get a better understanding of, how much of that is the seating in
Yeah,
Park
bleachers
2 and
actually
how
aren't that
much.
$168,000.
Yeah.
It's not
So
much.
that's what we need to get a better understanding of, the breakdown of the costs. It's too commingled in the packet, in the board packet, I think for us to really make a definitive decision of this needs to go or not. So that, I think that's what.
And that, I think that budget format is probably more typical to what you see in those SIA agreements that we had done previously, but we can absolutely go back to Matrix and say, separate it out. I mean, having looked at it and having given them direction on what we thought was the FTP process, you kind of just lump that together and you end up making these budget wags. That's probably where the developer came up with $2 million on Parks 3. You just start to kind of, you're trying to go from best guess, but we can go back to them and get construction costs.
Okay.
It's probably, I will be upfront, it's going to take time and it's going to cost us money to get there.
I mean, I don't know
We
if
can
you
get
need to
there.
get full construction costs. I think we just need to get a better understanding of when they say retaining walls, like how much of that is Park 1 and how much of that is Park 2.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they got to have that, right? Because they came up with an estimate on retaining walls, so they must have some type
Right.
of breakdown of that number.
So are we
right?
wanting just these numbers broken out
Broken
into the
down.
individual parks?
Yeah. I don't think we're asking them to necessarily do any
Because
more
there's
work.
a huge difference between breaking them down to parks and getting construction costs.
I think right now, just breaking it down by park it will be helpful enough. I know that, Trustee Pennington is saying construction costs. I think that's a decision. If the board wants to go down that avenue and they're going to be authorizing additional spending, they have every right to do that. I think all PROSTAC needs right now is a breakdown of these existing costs.
Well, I kind of want to understand, if we don't put in the water feature is budgeted at 350,000. Does that include all the infrastructure preparation that goes along with that? Because again, as I said, I don't see the cost of a field, of putting the field in. And, the field's one of the things that I most want to see stay in there, obviously, from my background. But I don't have a sense of what that field is in that big chunk, because it's not just laying down grass seed.
Right, okay.
Because we've got it's different putting down a field than putting down a great lawn that you play on, because you're going to get different wear and tear on an athletic field than you are on a lawn of grass that you play on. Like you go out and throw a frisbee on, but you don't play ultimate frisbee. So that's sort of, for me, I want to understand some of the amenities that we're talking about, how do they fit together?
Mhm.
Okay, so I think that's enough for this evening. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 2, the naming process for the new park. So everyone should have the list of the names that have been submitted. We're not going to decide on anything this evening because there is still another week left in the naming contest. So we'll probably work again on this next month. But if everyone could take a look at this, I would say if you want to mark, say, your top 5 or 10, and then write them on the board. We'll see how many common names we get.
Do that now, or?
If you're ready, yeah.
I guess I will be ready to do that. Are we adding Cadillac to the list? Since that's what we've been calling it, or Pinto?
Pinto Park?
Pickleball park. Pickleball park.
Done.
Get it over with. So can I ask a question real quick? How much are we really trying to tie it to the school? Is there,
There's no parameter.
I know.
would say there's no obligation to tell the school.
I mean, okay.
You just wanna be-
They're not paying for it, they get nothing.
I can't decide which one like that.
Yeah.
So the big sky belongs in Montana.
Yeah.
Do we in the audience get to do this?
It's a community engagement.
Across the ones that are the back.
Right, yeah. Thanks.
You see anybody put parking in front facing.
No one did.
We took out all the vulgar ones.
But that would have been more fun if you left them on the list.
What is TLDR?
What's that?
TLDR, too long to read.
I will say that the naming process for the last two parks was heavily focused on historical names. I mean, if the Historic Commission wants to weigh in on this, they're perfectly welcome to, but I don't know that this parcel has as much significance to the town's history as the previous two did. So I wouldn't feel an obligation to go with an historical name from PROSTAC. Again, the Historic Commission, if they want to weigh in, they can. Yeah. No.
Kind of like don't leave little bags of dog poop. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it should just be called off-leash dog.
Glad I showed my microphone off. Too many names.
It's almost a Southwest Park, right?
And it's like, with Maine residents.
And I'm getting my ass pinned.
Okay, point taken. You can't pick one. You're not feeling it?
Either one's more for you, though.
Everybody will call it.
I don't wanna feel beholden to that.
I like the reference to being an eagle in this, you have a big nest in your, brother.
Yeah,
Just trying to stay away.
trying to stay away from what, eagle?
Small eagles, that's fine.
Thing is, people are gonna start calling it.
Eldorado
They're
Park.
gonna call it Park, eagles, because
Well, I just,
we can efficient it.
but I think the sooner it gets its official name,
Yeah.
the more we can do to avoid that.
This is still called Target Park. It's still called Park by Target. It's still called
These are drivers too, if you want to be really cold.
Really no reason for it. It's never been officially named that.
No. Though I think,
They discussed it, didn't they?
someone I think finally pointed out that it does say it somewhere. Trying to remember if there is a sign there, somewhere. Is it-
No, I don't see it.
What?
So we will probably give a list of 5 names that we recommend to the board. And we can always say of the 5, you know, they're in this priority or whatever, like, you know, we can always kind of say this is our top pick.
We could add as a criminal data, like, you know, this was the most common name that was submitted, if that's one of the ones or whatever.
We can have commentary attached to the reason for our selection. Say, you know, if we picked Eagle's Nest, we could say because there was a common theme in submissions of eagle, you know, the school mascot is an eagle. But yeah, essentially we'll probably submit a list of like our top 5 to the board, and the board will make the decision. And like I said, they could choose to vet it with historical commission. Historical commission, of course, is gonna have a different list. It's not gonna match ours. Theirs is gonna be, you know, like some of the ones you saw on here of significant residents in town or whatever.
Do your kids go down to the
I
the reason, so these little things around here is you're on no equals
Come on, Chris. Need your input too.
I see, okay.
And their thing is to soil, a soccer ball, oh no, we can't do that, just soil, right?
SOAR,
Yeah.
and it's, what's SOAR stand for?
or something.
Safety,
And the
something,
screening
acceptance, something.
Indiana
Respect.
and
Yeah,
Respect,
something
yeah,
like that.
safety,
are the place
I don't know
designations.
what the other.
Indiana part means it's on Indiana, so it's not in Indiana.
Right, okay, yeah.
Understood.
I wanna say organization, that's not it.
That's what we use.
Hey,
Yeah.
see it every time you drive up to school, I look at it.
I was just looking at it. Someone said it,
Let's look at
I
it.
think someone said it in their description. Yeah, safety, ownership, acceptance, and respect. So the reason why I did see this, but that's, in here.
It's a community, isn't it? Someone.
It used to be the name of the golf course, but now it's Colorado.
That's right, yeah.
So that's why I'm like,
Well,
it's too
I
common.
kept thinking of it, going, something's named Mr. Rich, and I couldn't think of it
The,
because.
the same
up
reason
there-
why I kind of like went over anything that said like Flatirons. I was kind of like, there's already so many things around here that call Flatirons.
Well, I could change it to Vista View, and then nobody's ever used that.
I changed it to Patarones. My friends from Spain used to be over to visit, and he's like, I see signs everywhere that says Patarones, what's Patarones? But then you really got confused at table mix up.
Yeah, but shouldn't that
Yeah.
have
Yeah, table two.
EES?
So I live out kind of in between
Why?
Thornton and Brighton, and we have Yosemite. And we had a neighbor who, she would just call it Yosemite. And I finally was like, you know that's
That's not how you say it.
it's pronounced Yosemite, not Yosemite, but
My sister-in-law, who's a lawyer, when Mac, Apple, one of the operating systems was Yosemite, she's like, hey, she'd always call me in, right, for computer questions. Should I download this Yosemite?
Yeah.
Great source notes.
Yosemite. And I was-
Yosemite?
Yeah,
She's a well-to-do lawyer.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I lived in high school in Southern California, I grew up in New York, and when we moved to Southern California, my dad would butcher like the Spanish names.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just butcher them. I mean, this, he had this, could be something British guy was butchering these names. It was like embarrassing sometimes, like what he would say.
I had a friend ask about it, called Chocolates. Yeah, there's new color for that Metropolis.
Metropolitan.
You're putting the wrong process in the wrong salad.
Yeah.
Yeah, soup's fun. Wouldn't that be fun? At least to be able to say it. I go to canned soups.
Call the board. Where are you going?
Nowhere.
I'll call it alibi. Where were you at? I don't know. I have an alibi, wasn't it?
I have an alibi.
Been busy?
We could shoot this to Corey and have him do his.
I think so.
Well, we'll just-
Virtually.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously gonna have to do it next month.
It's over.
Ready to start doing
If everyone's done, I guess, you wanna take a picture of it,
I
Patrick?
just mean to get with you guys, did that finally go through? What's the story on that? We haven't caught that, or heard wind of what's.
No, I think
After 12 inches or
I think the decision was
After 12 inches.
he's revising the plan right now, but I think.
No, he told me,
What is the revised plan?
I don't, I know,
Now, once you got to a certain amount, then
It's
it's
not
how
actually
it's driven.
sold.
No, no, but isn't that play structure, doesn't that look like a nest?
Ron, you add a couple more in there?
Yes.
Like a
No,
brown
no,
grape?
it's
All right, I'll wait.
they have like all these little.
They do fall, no worries.
But George, I am sure they
Oh,
just
that-
need to
It
go
looks like a
down
giant
one
nest,
and
right?
change
it
the
looks
direction.
actually more like a
You
teepee.
know what? I was like, maybe like,
Yeah, just go down
That's a
and
nest.
change the direction.
and that's why I instantly thought I should, that's because it's kind of a structure.
I also just like Eagles Nest. I like Eagles Nest Wilderness.
We don't have any.
Did you have an accident?
There is actually, isn't there a bald eagle that lives out in Gillian Road?
I am gonna ride with you
Oh, yeah,
this.
that's-
We're buying
If you bring, I'll bring the hot chocolate.
Yeah, over in Louisville. This is not Louisville.
Theoretically migrate his way over here
He
one
ain't
day.
over here.
No, because
How do you
Look
attract?
at how many
how do
buses
you
we
attract-
have around here.
Hold
Oh, Kestrel.
No, the other day
So
we
we got a
heard,
million
the
Kestrel.
other day, Trails Day, where they had the
more
guy with
hawks
all
in town.
the angles and stuff that comes out.
Wait,
Yeah,
everyone
they
wants
say,
to
"Hey,
hawks."
guys,"
Yeah, they're
he
all
had a
hawks.
bald eagle.
There's too many things around your name Hawk.
Yeah.
Just have to.
No, what's he did was say that, and I
He
took
said,
people
well,
to
strange
Birch.
to watch you, that we try to get some of that.
There's no,
It was bald eagle.
Put it,
I don't want to see the rest of
I
this.
got a zoom in picture of it. It was all on your head.
put it on paper and have town staff put it on paper and we'll follow directions of what it would be.
All right. So yeah, I think that's, Patrick took a picture. So,
Yep.
I mean, the only one that has 3 is Eagles Nest. But, so we'll continue this next month when we have any final submissions. Patrick, do you have a way of just, the ones that are submitted past today, or you can put it on a separate sheet of paper, so we don't have to like look at them all again, we can just look at
You made some up there, George?
No, I didn't. See, the deal is I ran out of handwriting space, and my penmanship is really, really poor. So I put the American Veteran Dash Memorial Park is one.
Yeah, that was
on there.
on there.
So that's what I put up there. That's what I-
Okay.
So I just put a dash to go underneath. That's all I.
All right, so we'll pick this up next month. So moving on to item number 3. So, once a year, we just get a update from staff on the status of the recreational programming in town. So Patrick has something ready for that to show us.
All right. Give me one second. All right. So, what I went ahead and kind of asked the staff to do this year, and if you guys can kind of bear with me for a couple minutes, is I'll just quickly kind of go over our program areas, which are special events, outdoor education, aquatics, general programming, and then volunteer opportunities. And these are really just kind of the big picture highlights. And then if you've got questions or if you've got ideas, just hop right in. I think we've kind of done this pretty informally in the past. So, our biggest special events obviously are Arbor Day, 4th of July, Pancake Festival and Breakfast, Chili Fest, all of those huge successes this year. I think we're officially saying that we were probably around the 10 to 12,000 mark for Chili Fest. We were somewhere in the 7,000 mark for 4th of July and a couple hundred for the Arbor Day event. Something new that wasn't new, but we enhanced the passport program, and we had well over 200 people pick up passports, which was a big win for us. We were pretty happy about that. So, we were pretty proud of the fact that in a town of, 12 to 13,000 people that, you get numbers like 7,000 and 10,000 to show up to your events. And those are numbers that we come up with the assistance of Boulder County. That largely falls on Katie's shoulders to put those together. The board has tasked us with coming up with another event, not for 2017, but for 2018. So we'll add another event to our list, which we're pretty excited about.
Any idea what time of year that might fall?
Something probably that'll focus in Original Town, maybe over at Founders Park. I don't know if it'll be Superior Days-ish, but we'll come up with something. I think that there's just a lot of demand for another kind of wholesome, just simple community event that we can hold here in Original Town. We also do the annual, this is our 3rd year doing it, but the tree lighting and what used to be the truck lighting. We're not going to light the truck up this year, obviously, because we spent, $25,000 on it. I don't think the Historic Commission will be happy if I put lights on it and let it sit out in the winter. But a great year for events. They've already yelled at me quite a bit, so we'll leave that one alone. So moving over to volunteer projects, with the addition of Tori's position, we had a huge year for volunteer projects. She hosted what we were calling alternative spring break. We had 23 participants, 8th grade through 12th grade. And the kids volunteered each day of the week at a different organization. It was huge. We did wildflower bed planting. We did bark at the park art, where we had youth in the neighborhood paint our old fire hydrants and put them in the park. We hosted a couple of bike park builders, and then we did obviously a couple of trail maintenance. We're hosting a couple times a quarter is our goal in terms of hosting volunteer activities. What we find is it's a lot of groups, and and kids that just need to meet their volunteer requirement, which is fine. We're still trying to kind of tweak and change snow busters. It kind of comes and goes. But volunteer opportunities was huge this year. We actually had over 300 volunteers specific to our town events, most of those being at Chili Fest, but it was unbelievable. We had a great year. Tori also worked with her, what we call SLIC, which is Superior Youth Leadership Council. They did an Arbor Day art contest, several community story times in the park, and then they did a pool party palooza. And then Tori has also started branching out in cooperation with the HOA to host, some kind of Xeric 101 classes, just continuing to help people kind of wrap their heads around ways that they can be more efficient with their landscaping. So kind of quickly shifting over to Brian Meyer's world, which is the aquatics. We had 473 participants in swim lessons, which is it's about what we get every year. Our classes are kind of maxed out. They are what they are with the time that we have available in the pool. Over 20 kids in private swim lessons. We had 32 people in the master swim program, 26 in the Discover Scuba program, which continues to be a great program. Brian and his crew staffed over 30, they staffed 31 pool parties. And then we helped kind of manage we had 15 swim days for the camps, which are always a little bit labor intensive for
So
us.
Patrick, the pool parties, you're saying like those are actual people
Rent
renting the pool?
Yep.
That's outside of operational hours?
Those are in
It's
operational
in
hours.
operational hours,
Yeah.
okay.
One of Brian's big responsibility is helping coordinate the stocking run. This year's stocking run will be on December 11th. Our 2015 race had over 400 runners, and it was cold, so that was actually a touch on the low side for us. Our previous year, we were up around 700. Something new that Brian worked on for us this year was a partnership with a group called Out and About. Out and About's a group that we can contact to help make our programs accessible to everyone. Let's say a kid wants to sign up for Marcelo Balboa soccer camp and has a certain set of needs that they need assistance with. We don't have a therapeutic recreation specialist on staff. We don't necessarily have the resources, but Brian did an amazing job tracking down this Out and About group who we could then contract and have them provide staff under any circumstance to make sure that our programs are always as accommodating as possible. Brian also helps with the majority of our YMCA kind of partnerships, as well as helping manage kind of the tennis program. As you guys know, the YMCA soccer got it just got off this year. We had come to the board and said, hey, we'd like to maybe pursue a different direction for soccer. We heard a huge outcry from the YMCA say, you can't partner, it's got to stay recreational. And then we get an email a couple months later that they've partnered with a competitive club. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. We're still trying to work through what soccer's ultimately going to look like. We were a little bit surprised just to see that they had kind of made that partnership and there wasn't a lot of conversation. We've heard that those numbers for youth sports through the YMCA have gone down quite a bit. I don't know that that's accurate. They haven't turned in their rosters yet. So we're starting to look at some different avenues for our youth soccer program, including just continuing to work with the YMCA and maybe have them, add a little bit. Moving on to the outdoor education piece, we hosted How to Haze Coyote program, which is always a great program, the Winter Wildlife Walk, Beginning Bird Walk, the Jeff and Paige concert, which is always huge. We did a new program called Nocturnal Flyers. We did a bug hunt, and then we did a nighttime coyote hike, which was great. And then we hosted a program called Snakes Alive. So it's been pretty cool because minus the Jeff and Paige concert, we're getting about 300 people to participate in our outdoor education programs, which is a great number. We're really happy with that number. Moving on just to general programming, We've coordinated a couple of star parties, which is in conjunction with Boulder County, inviting our residents to just kind of go out and do some stargazing with some groups that actually have equipment and telescopes. We had 60 enrolled in that. We continue to host Slackline Clinic, the tree climbing clinic. We worked with I-9 Sports on some youth, little guy sports clinics. Ultimate Disc Camp was huge this year. We had 90 kids in our Ultimate Camp, which was really exciting. Close to 200 in Marcelo's soccer camp. We did some art, Monet for a Day programs. We did the Foam Dart Frenzy again, which was huge. So we're still continuing to try to come up with new program opportunities, but our numbers they kind of are what they are. I think the people that look for programming in town have probably already found our programs. I think people that are looking for more your fitness or your youth sports are probably finding those services outside of town. So it was a good year. We were up into the $70,000 range for program revenue, which is about what we get. It's not a huge number. We don't charge a lot for our programs, but that is kind of the quick upshot on programming. The only other thing I'll add to that is the pros staff. We're going to meet with the crew over from Sports Stable on the 27th. We think that there are some projects that we can coordinate with together, summer camp opportunities. They're just this week working on free community pickleball. So we're really working with them to try to identify some programming that they could do for our community that wouldn't have to be tied to a membership necessarily. So adult sports programming, pickleball, they've already had a handful of people showing up for pickleball.
Where?
In their gymnasium.
In the Impact Gymnasium?
In Impact, yep. Yeah, so I know that they're looking at indoor soccer leagues. We've talked a little bit about a Sunday morning pre-Broncos game, touch or flag football. So we're excited to meet with those guys next week. And one of the things that we'd like to talk about is a Thanksgiving break camp and then potentially a summer camp that would be in partnership. We have some amenities that I think are really unique that our community could take advantage of. They've got some great amenities that I think the community should take advantage of. And I think there's a way that we could do some reasonably cost summer camps. We continue to hear that camps in this area are just outrageous and people can't afford it. So right now we're working on a concept to maybe do sports camp for half the day, but then come over and almost do a playoff the second grade field trips, where you could do some sports activities, but then you can come over and get a little bit of history and culture about your town. And it would truly be a partnership between what we could offer in town and what those guys could offer at Sports Stable. And then in the summer, maybe they do some camp activities, but then the kids come do some volunteer activities with us, and then they work with Brian and his staff to do some pool time in the afternoon. So
I will say that at least what I hear is the biggest challenge is full day camp activities, because you pretty much have to be a stay-at-home parent to do the half days.
Right.
And there's tons of half day opportunities that are more affordable. It's the full day camps
absolutely
that are the challenge for the working parents.
And with us doing the contract model, that is something that I think that this is a good opportunity for us to kind of dip into the full day, where we have some contractors, we have enough different groups and staffing resources where we can put together a full day. And the price points that the Sports Stable guys have talked about have been literally like right on the nose, $100, which is several $100s cheaper than camp. They're working on a Thanksgiving Day camp, which would be 7 in the morning to 5 o'clock at night, $100 for the week. So I think there's some really good opportunities for us to partner with these guys and make sure that it's just not always about privatized recreation, that our community members have an opportunity to participate in rec activities as well at a really reasonable cost.
How does that compare to the YMCA drop-in programs? Do they do that at Superior Elementary School in the holiday time?
Yeah, I think it would be a little.
It's gotta be.
It's probably going to be a little bit cheaper
Yeah, I think
and a
so.
little bit more sports centric.
Right,
You know, they're talking about having different stations set up where you could do a sports sampler and maybe you spend some time on the ice. And then, you know, eventually you can maybe go up to the golf simulator and you can do some, you know, wiffle ball, softball, you know, all age appropriate with some games. And then, you know, eventually when the coffee shop's open, then the kids can transition over, have their lunch there. You know, and then the Parks and Rec staff, we would really love to have a hand in it because I think that there's a way that we can bring these kids in to understand volunteerism and some of our bigger stuff. You know, we talked about creek cleanups and really trying to get these kids vested back in town. But what we've been very upfront with those guys about trying to keep their pricing low, more comparable to a Parks and Rec department, not, you know, not several $100s for a camp. You know, make this affordable and user friendly for the community. So that's hopefully where we'll end up. Yeah. So it's been a fun year of programming. We had a busy year.
Any definite changes for next year, or?
I think we're gonna probably try to dedicate a little bit more time and resources to soccer camp with Marcelo. It's been around for a long time. It needs some tweaks. I think we've plateaued and our numbers are kind of going down a little bit. I'd like to see where the partnership with the sports stable goes. Brian Meyer and I have talked a lot about, you know, maybe there's some things that we could do as a staff to enhance the experience for the second grade field trips, or start to look at, you know, we've always played around with this idea of playing on the word mind camp and actually having a mind camp, which is more of a history-based camp, and trying to do some partnership with the Historic Commission. Yeah, but I think between that partnership, I think we're getting at the point where we still need to maybe do something different with soccer. It went so poorly last time, and a lot of that was my fault for maybe pushing it. But it seems like soccer really got off track this past year. The YMCA's lost almost their entire staff, so that staff that came and presented is actually no longer around. So I would really like to fix that, because I think youth sports in this community could be done a lot better. It's just difficult when you do it with a contractor. So,
what about the outdoor fishing, fly fishing? Is that going to be on the boats? And what are we going to do about that?
Yeah, so we pulled fly fishing because we knew we were going to be doing a bunch of pond work at Purple. I totally anticipate fly fishing coming back. We've also discussed the fishing derby with the state, where they come in and we used to do it, I guess, at Riverbend way back when it was the HOA and the districts. But that fishing, fishing went really well, and I think they're hopefully we're done tinkering with the ponds.
Hopefully.
Yeah. You know, Lydia's had some great ideas about partnering with Boulder County and their consortium for older adults. I think now that we have the community room, things like chair yoga, core stability for older adults, we at least now have that flexibility to where we can be the host. It's always hard to promote programs that don't happen in your own town. So I think that there are some things that we can kind of start to dabble in. Lydia had a great idea about a program that she saw that was called Take a Walk with the Doc, where it's an informal, you know, literally you're going on a walk with a medical professional. You can ask informal questions related to kind of health and fitness. Maybe it's a free activity that can take place. So we're always excited to try new stuff. It's just having a place to sometimes put it, and then staffing resources. So.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So moving on to item number 4. This is just an update on the trail project that's currently out there for design.
I'll make this quick.
We have a couple. Is there only one or a couple that you have?
One, we're ready to go to bid, and then I'll explain. I just want to bring you guys into the loop on an alignment that we're looking at.
You said OSAC has not seen this, they'll see it next month?
Right, the alignment's there, it's just the technical specs were a little bit off. All right, Ron, would you mind killing the lights one more time, man? Sorry about that. So kind of going back to the expedited trails program, remember one of the small trails we had talked about, it's really hard to see it here, but this line's Colton Road. We had the little kind of offshoot trail. So this is the existing trail coming under Rock Creek. This is Colton Road right here. This is where we park everybody for Chili Fest up on the Richmond site. So this is what was originally labeled Trail F in that expedited trails program. We were initially thinking that it would be a straight shot following the grade of the road, which was pretty far from ADA compliant. So we asked Loris to kind of come up with a design option that made it a little bit more user-friendly. And you can see kind of where we're at here. Trail spurs, somewhere probably in that 450-foot range. We're about ready to take it out to bid, but it'll be 8-foot wide concrete trail. And it'll work with the grade. It's surprising there's a lot of grade in there. One of the things that I've definitely noticed going through this process is it's one thing to have a yellow line on a sheet of paper. It's something completely different when you start looking at drainage and ADA compliance, and the cost of concrete's just still going through the roof. But we're excited. My guess is that this will probably end up in the $60,000 range, depending on what bids come in. But we're ready. We're ready and excited to kind of bring this one forward to the board.
What did Laura say, what it would cost to build that?
Loris?
Yeah, Laura, sorry.
They're the same, kind of in that 60 to 70 range, depending on. We've thickened it up quite a bit because the soils are tough and you're down in Rock Creek. So we asked that they do, sub-X, dig down, clear out all the garbage, and then put in some good material to keep that thing from moving around.
What is the specs on the concrete?
I'd have to get it to you. I'll pull it up. It's whatever was in that adopted town spec that we've been using for the other parks. It's the fiber mesh. I don't remember exactly what the thickness was.
Okay.
But so that's where we are with that trail, and it's taken us a little bit longer, but I think we're getting there.
And so do you think we'll still have all the trail designs sometime next month?
I'll be honest with Loris. Doing all of our other projects in town, I think we'll be close. The open space Coyote Ridge Trails design, so I could bring that design forward. And right now it's just the big trail that's going to come down from Indiana Street down McCaslin.
Because the two we need to have to hold the public engagement were the one
Correct.
in Coyote Ridge, and then the one that goes off of Torrey's Peak, between Torrey's Peak and McCaslin.
And Coyote
So
Ridge is done. That one's done.
But what about the other one? Would we have that in time to try to have the public engagement prior to the November PROSTAC meeting, like we originally thought we might?
I think we could probably get it there. I think there's going to be enough information about the alignment that if we're not overly concerned about having the technical specs, I think we'll be in good shape. So, if you guys will remember, one of the trails that we had talked about was coming off of Indiana and coming down to Calmonte. And then Calmonte's on the hook to build their trail connecting over to this trail, and then that trail that I was just showing you, the little serpentine, will be right here. So originally we were thinking, man, it'll be great, we'll just concrete this up, everybody's using it anyway. That grade was ridiculous, and there were some issues over here. So that's this trail I just showed you. So kind of backing up a little bit, we started doing the design. You remember we had a trail spur in through here, which the board suggested we do some public outreach just to these homes, since it would be a change. So trail would come down Indiana, follow the grade, follow the grade. It would pick up with this little trail here. Come down. There would be a spur here. And then it would come down and connect. Laura's came to us with an initial kind of design and kind of a budget wag like we've seen on the parks, and said, hey, just to let you know, there's this massive drainage right here, and the rate of speed of the cars coming down McCaslin, we really recommend some separation since this is a recreational trail. We're gonna need to cut this hillside way back and put in a retaining wall. It's probably gonna make this trail somewhere in the $1 million range. I said, oh man, well let's go back to the drawing board. So then they started kind of playing around with this idea of maybe the trail comes down McCaslin, picks up the trail here. But when you get here, instead of crossing over this drainage on the high side, we wander people on this ridge here, pick up the trail, which was always the plan, but instead of being over by McCaslin, we kind of meander the trail down through this open space area and then bring it up and pick it up to the Calmonte trail that would be over here. So that's what they're currently working on. But I did want you guys to kind of be brought in the loop because the original recommendation was this straight shot trail from Calmonte Avenue all the way up. But the cost to build this big stone retaining wall right here, I mean, we were talking like a 12-foot tall retaining wall and excavating on the side of McCaslin. I just don't know that that would have ever passed the sniff test with our board without us at least looking at an alternative, cheaper option to accomplish the same
what
thing.
would it cost for just like a little prefab footbridge
For over here?
to go over a drainage like that? Could you do it?
No. So your bridges have to be built to handle the potential maximum flow.
Flood?
And this is a big bridge. This would be bigger than the bridge in Autry Park. So you're talking, that bridge was $275,000. Now, what we ran into here is just proximity to the road and the grade. It's a pretty steep drop off. So it wouldn't have been too big of a deal just to kind of come and curve it around. But this pipe here really kind of started to throw a wrench in the game. And it's definitely doable. But then you have very recreational use next to a really, really high rate of speed. And then that would start to require, all right, so do we need to put guardrail in here? And then introducing guardrail, does that become a potential hazard for road bikers plus traffic coming down the hill in a storm? So we asked those guys to come back to the drawing board and maybe look at making the connection here and come down through here and do a low water crossing, something that's intended to flood over and still hold, like what we have over in Community Park. And then, you know, us chatting with Calmonte and saying, hey, we think this would be a win-win for everybody if we connected our trail in. You know, this trail will come wrap around. We do a nice intersection somewhere up here, and then it's back to where we planned it. So, any questions on that one?
No. So I'll touch base with you to see if we think we can get something that we can notice with enough
Yeah.
time to hold. So if everyone, just to remind everyone, what we had originally thought was for public engagement on this trail between Torrey's and McCaslin, and then the Coyote Ridge spur that would go off to like Pirate Park. We were thinking that we would have like a public engagement, say 6 to 7 or 6:30 to 7 before the PROSTAC meeting. So if you can attend the extra half hour, that would probably be sufficient, and we'll notice the residents who directly border it so that they can come, as well as the rest of the town. But we'll make sure that the residents that directly border it get a notice. And so we can hear any feedback before, we make any type of recommendation to the board with the designs that they'll see.
We're definitely, if we're just wanting alignment, we're there. I can get both of those,
Okay.
no problem. If we're looking for the big, kind of detailed like that other one, it may take a while. But for public engagement, you may only need,
I think they're gonna be concerned about alignment, and I think we can pretty much predict what we'll hear.
yeah.
I mean, put it that way.
I can tell you this, but every time we went over and walked it, the residents came out and weren't happy about it.
Yeah.
I don't know much about the Coyote Ridge one. I'm optimistic that one will go well.
That
This
one,
is
that
gonna
one
be a tough
borders,
sell.
directly borders like 2 houses.
Yeah,
It's, so.
yeah. I've received a handful of phone calls about this one, and then when we were working on the El Dorado Park, trying to come up with an irrigation connection, every time we went over there, 2 residents came out and said they were against it. So-
Yeah, I've already heard from one as well. So, all right. I think we're good. Any questions? So the updates and look-aheads, everyone should have gotten a invitation for the, for trustees, Sorelli, and then Elia and Deb Williams they're having that next Tuesday from 4 to 7. So if you can attend, that would be great. It's always, I think I went to the last time they had one of those. It was nice. And then next Thursday we have our committee open house. I'm unable to attend because of the HOA meeting. So if anyone is available to attend, it runs usually, what is it, 6 to 8?
Is it Thursday?
Was
What
that
did you say it was?
Thursday? Yeah, a week from tomorrow.
Okay.
But usually if anyone can even just come for the first 45 minutes or something, see if anyone shows up, just to discuss the committee, for anyone interested in joining, that would be great. If not, we'll just have an informational sheet out on the table. So if you can check your schedule, just let me know if you can attend.
Starts at 6.
I think it's 6, right, Patrick?
Mhm.
It's here.
Yeah, in this room at 6 o'clock next Thursday. Yeah.
So that's hard.
You can, all right, yeah, if you can, that would be great. Generally, no one shows up, but it's nice, since we do have 3 vacancies, it would be good if we can have someone here to field any questions should someone show up. So, I think that's it. So, meeting adjourned. Do you have
Okay,
any-
see how
yeah,
exciting it
any
is now.
questions for us, Sean?
I'm definitely interested, so I'll probably put in the application tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Oh, okay.
So have 3 vacancies.
We do.
Okay.
We don't,
Yeah, I find this interesting, so.
we don't usually get bogged down on one subject like we did tonight.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
We can bug our.
Yeah, and I asked him. Sorry.
You won't tell
You
them
know
that.
when you get that name.
Bunch of it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great name.
What's that?
Do you have
Airy.
the applications
You know, 'cause
online?
that's what it is.
Yep,
That's
I-
what it is.
Okay.
AERIE.
Okay, and then you can either send it right back to me or
And
actually our
then we
assistant
would
town manager,
sort of
Martin
be
Topp.
giving some credit to
He actually will
Eldorado.
kind of coordinate
With-
and
in
kind of
an
The
next
only thing
steps
is, the only thing I always
we'll
am
work
concerned
with
about,
you
like
to do
park
kind
names,
of
is
a
like, do
quick
you really want to
interview.
have a name that you
Normally
have to
in a work
explain
session
what it
before.
is?
Or if, when they
And then
people
it
have
goes
to
from there, but
work.
it's
Exactly,
pretty-
like,
it's
or even spelling.
It's
for
fun.
that matter,
They'll
right?
We've had some
learn how to
vacancies
spell
for a
it,
while,
they'll
so-
learn how to
Okay.
say it.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Could I just send it to you?
Absolutely, let me grab you my
Yeah,
card.
'cause it could
Okay,
also
fantastic.
be, isn't it EYRIE, which is also
How are you doing?
a word. But Harry was better than giving evil to the school. I don't even think it's the schools.
Yeah.
Oh, soccer program.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely, I think it's a cool opportunity, it's a fun group.
Yeah, we got a follower.
And then normally, so we've got our November meeting, and then we normally do kind of a holiday party in December. We may actually have business in December.
I was gonna say, at the rate we're going, we're gonna be
I know.
business in December.
We can do both. We can always cater in food too.
Minutes to an hour here.
We're a lovely town.
Bring food in or whatever.
Once you wish your application in, then
It's
you.
gonna be like the good old PROSTAC days, man. Lots of brain damage. But it's good, we gotta figure it out. Gotta figure it out.
I don't know if I want to jump in.
Yeah, well,
I would agree. I would agree. Well, we still have to talk about, you know.
And that's why I stayed here.
And we're gonna be really, as Peter mentioned, we'll be delving into the whole indoor space recreation center. We'll have a lot of cool stuff. Good. Thank you. Thanks. Glad you came.
Thanks. I'm gonna send Patrick.
Yeah, man.
I'll download it. Thanks.
Urban Land Institute.
Go down and say, okay, what's your opinion?
Planting trees without spinning.
You have something.
So, I don't know. You got busy or doing snow or what? You got the, shot on us or something?
We're still trying to track new, Did you already drop it in the box? The Post had an article and it
Let's
said
catch up,
that.
'cause I
You
need to decide where you're gonna put that.
Yeah, I've got it.
And it doesn't say
There's
town.
gonna be a lot more that are going to drop off.
Well, I've had it for
Actually, a whole lot more people.
3 years.
I have kind of a, I have a landscape plan for it. I had it drawn up a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I've got a place in it, but I wanna chat with Rick,
You
cause
can just drive up and do it,
I
yeah.
thought there was some electrical over there, maybe
Well,
we
you
could
know,
do some
there's
lights or
that dollar
something.
Here's the deal, is that when I tore it out today, when I tore it out, because I did tear it out, I was the one
It
who
woke
tore it
me
out.
up.
Because it's some electrical, but it was all done by solar.
Yeah, I think it was Sunday morning, my phone came on.
It was a solar light,
Yeah,
and it ran off, I think it ran off the battery, I'm not too sure.
I think you're right, dude, they weren't all that good, if I remember.
Your ballot is at the post office, but it
I've
didn't,
got
it
that,
said,
and,
I got the text today that said that it was in the mail.
Yeah,
But it was
I
in
still
my
have
mailbox,
mine.
so I got
I
mine,
did too.
which was weird.
Mine, because I got the text.
I asked Alex to mark the ones that he wants to keep for roundabout, and then I wanna move the rest.
Yeah, and then it was in my box tonight, when I had it, and I was like, well, there's no way it's just mailed today, because it wouldn't have moved very fast.
Really?
So, but I thought that was kind of a cool.
Why is it
But
nice?
at least now you know, because I'm always.
West Tories. Park right
It could be, it could be the impact of some major event. Do you need help?
Drove right.
Somebody drove right through the park.
through this park?
Yeah. Remember, some guy came out too, and his dog went right to the bathroom as the guys were working there. And then she turned around and walked back. They're like, come on, man. Yeah, somebody drove through the park.
They're mad at us?
No, I just kidding.
Well, the
We
kids
get
were
all-
definitely in rare form this
we
weekend
get all
because
kinds of weird stuff.
we found out where a lot of the signs were.
Oh, yeah, really?
We did. There's a team of athletes at Monarch High School
Oh,
that apparently that was their fun activity. They went out and pulled all the signs, and we were out putting out door hangers this weekend. There were tons of signs in this.
I believe it.
Up on Masters Circle off El Dorado.
Well, because,
And so we went up to the door, you know, because I didn't want to just go pull my signs
yeah.
and just walk on somebody's private property and pull the signs. So my friend that was helping me went up and knocked on the door, and the woman told us who it was. And, you know, I'm going to talk to the coach and just say, you know, your kids could get in pretty big trouble.
That'd be
for
great
this.
because Gladys has called the sheriff's department to investigate.
Yeah, and.
So she came after me really hard today and coming after the Vargas guy. So I'm pretty confident it wasn't the Vargas guy.
Well, and this wasn't all of them, but there were 3 of mine, I think there were 3 or 4 of Mark's, there were
Yeah.
several of Gladys's. And so my folks, you know, because they were in
Yeah.
that neighborhood, they pulled my signs. And so then I was like, all right, well, I'll go back and pull everybody else's signs and then give them to them. And, you know, and I didn't have everybody's texts or anything.
Is it
but-
cross country?
Huh?
Is it cross country?
It was.
Man, those kids are actually a lot more, they're the ones, we poured all that concrete a couple of years ago, back over here behind Town Hall, and every time we poured it, they would come and write all over it and then put their shoe prints in.
Yeah.
Those kids had to pay for us.
Well, I'm gonna,
Maybe the concrete.
I haven't had a chance to write the coach yet, but when we went to the door, the mom said that it was the cross-country team.
Well, Chamberlain and Boulder County's working on it. So,
Well, you know, I didn't want the kids to get in big trouble, and so I was just gonna write the coach and say, you know, you really ought to have these kids do some community service, because this is a punishable offense.
well, because it was funny, when we went after them for the concrete,
Yeah.
the same thing, we finally had to call the cops.
Well, the
Oh, my
moms,
goodness,
the
you
wo-
should see these.
when we went to the door, that's what mom said, she was furious.
Just
She
know
was
that-
mad, we went to the door, so I said, oh, well, that's one vote I probably won't get.
The
So-
pushback that we get, anytime one of these high school kids does anything, the pushback we get from the parents on involved in law enforcement, potentially destroying their futures. I mean,
Well, I mean, and that's why I wasn't making a big deal about it, because I didn't really want to hurt kids or anything, but at the same time,
they gotta
you know,
learn it.
we added up the number of signs in the yard and just started out, you know, time the cost of mine, and it was like $150
Yeah,
when you
just-
added up all the costs of the signs. But by the time I went back to take them, to get them out of the yard, they were completely gone.
Yeah.
And,
See,
you know,
'cause
at
even
that
right
point, I
now,
wasn't gonna go up and,
Gladys is coming after me to pay for all her missing signs. I'm like,
yeah.
Vargas, like, those guys know if they touch anything, they're gone. Those guys typically aren't gonna risk their jobs
Yeah.
to do things like move political signs.
Yeah, and I mean, and my sign, one of the places where mine had disappeared, Vargas guys were out mowing,
Yeah.
and I knew it wasn't them, because I was putting the sign back in, and they were right there, and they went
Yeah.
completely around it. So I was fairly confident it wasn't Vargas, but yeah, I think it was, some prankster children.
Well, and that team, I don't know if it's when they go on their big team runs. Man, they're just like a bunch of kids.
You know, and that's just a shame. That's just, see, that sounds like something we'd have a reputation of ultimate kids with.
Urban land. Stevens, I think Stevens meeting the food guys here at like 7 a.m. So I told him I'd set up for the group.
Hold on a second.
See you, Peter.
So do you want me to call Chamberlain and tell, should I do that? And tell
You
him?
or I would, 'cause I really don't want to get, I hate these parties. Those poor guys, they're just trying to do work.
Yeah, they're just guys out there doing their jobs.
So, you know, and I'll look like when she comes on, and she comes.
Well,
in, I don't want
and I
to
mean,
get-
honestly, Daryl was out, Yeah, Daryl was helping me putting
See,
the
'cause I know-
hangers out, and she said, no, because I was gonna call Gladys, and she says, no, she says, Gladys will come unglued.
She did today, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so,
And then she's planning.
she wasn't saying it to be mean to Gladys, she was saying it's better for the situation if we just get Gladys the signs and take them back.
Well,
to
and
her,
the other
which is
thing,
what
I
we're
mean,
gonna do.
she'll respond to Chamberlain, but, because she let me know she's gonna come down and come unglued on Monday. So maybe I'll chat with her before Monday night and say, hey, just so you know,
Yeah.
don't come unhinged, because we think we know what's up.
Yeah.
It's this kid stealing the election signs. And she went straight after Vargas. Well, she got a hold of Elena and Victor Vargas today and threatened to sue him, arrest them.
Oh.
And then she, but that's, I just,
But I mean, literally, I have no.
those guys don't touch the signs.
I have no sense that it's them at all.
Is this too many?
You know.
I don't know how many people are part of this panel for the ULI thing, so Martin, he said he would be back. But yeah, I asked Tommy to verify what's up with the paint,
Okay.
because if it's that chalk stuff, it just comes
Well,
right off.
if we
I just
find-
want to make sure that,
Bye.
I'm not telling you to spray with the crap that we have, and then I realize that it's like latex. or
Yeah, no, I
it's,
was looking at it. and I
latex or
didn't feel
something.
comfortable. It looks- Yeah, if it's latex, we don't want it on there because it will be on there.
Well, and it'll come off, but
No, that-
it's not as good. It's
If we've got any more of that paint that was left over from the beginning of the year, that's the stuff to use because it will rinse off.
oh, that's awesome. That stuff that like sprayed on kind of one color and turned into another.
Well, it was
color.
supposed to turn white, but it pretty much stayed.
Orange, right? Or it was white and went to orange.
I
or
think
it
if you
was
put it on
orange.
too heavy, it stays orange. So this thing about the Part 22, I think that we're going down the path that we're going to be stopped.
I agree.
So,
It's not going to be that hard. It's a small meeting in March.
yeah, I think, is that possible? I mean, is there a cost to that?
There is, see, what I was trying to tell Maggie is, if we're truly looking for construction costs, we got to get to construction documents, which is, then you're talking thickness of concrete, rebar, and that doesn't factor in. See, so much of it, like, if we get to construction costs, then they'll have to come and do it, like a soil sample. And then if the soil's shaky, then concrete's going from 6 inches to 12 inches. And I told Vance, I'm worried the cost would get more expensive. What I would like to do is work with Ian to maybe not go balls to the wall. And maybe we don't need a $700,000 restroom facility with concession. Maybe we can get by with a 200.
Well, I agree with Sandy that, it'd be nice to keep it the way it is. But I agree with that, this is great to have a concession stand, yeah, referees room, coaches rooms and all that.
But is it
But
essential?
I don't,
Is a thickened concrete performance stage off the road essential? Probably not.
I would
So
say-
some of that, I think,
I'm disappointed with PROSTAC this year. We did that down the park, I remember before, we did do an FDP down the park.
no, well, see, so that's the other thing. And I've never, and I talked to Ian, you normally don't do it these for parks, but I think the reason why we did is because it's public improvement. And that, or the board, or whomever wanted it to be really buttoned up and really documented. So, yeah, a lot of what we're doing, you normally would do, you would go to like 50% design documents, which is when we came back to you guys with Eldo and said, hey, we're at 50% design and we think it's gonna be this amount of money. Then you add 25% more detail, and then you get it to about 90%, you put it out to bid. So here, we basically went from concept to like 75% with nothing in between, because we were trying to get, my guess is we were trying to get it before the board turned over. Is my thought is probably was the driver. So we skipped a bigger piece.
Yeah, I think the way we do it is bound is smart.
discuss, and, I mean, you know, there was talk at one point of maybe the boutique hotel would pitch in, and there'd be some shared like kitchen space, so it's tough, because I think that we're so far away. I get where they're trying to go with it.
I understand,
But-
it'd be nice if we could say, we have $3.75 million to spend on Park One.
Yeah.
That's if they want to use both. When was the last time we did that?
Right.
At the beginning of a parking lot, we could just have a county thing in the park. So what I think we should do, I'm just at the point of close up and initially say, are you just going to go ahead? I think so too. I was kind of almost the same way, that she's seen it a lot. So that, I wonder where the saying we did a lot. Because he called me about this stuff last week.
But
I think 100%, and I didn't want to say that, but we totally were.
I almost got, I was gonna try to stand up and do the math.
No, you can look through those, and you don't need the turf, and it says that $250,000 for a rolled-out turf.
Yeah, all you have to do is take the square footage.
It's not that hard to figure out.
But I think what they were almost getting themselves to was trying to mathematically say, all right, we know what park, we know what Village Green is kind of gonna cost. Kind of know what Park Three is gonna cost, that leaves X million dollars for these two parks. And then if we could break that down between those two, really, what we almost need is kind of the à la carte menu of, here's what the amenities cost.
I agree.
And then go through a prioritization of saying, all the way back to when we very first did the very first public engagement, here's what's essential, you know, and from the get-go, it was athletic field on two, passive space on one, restroom facilities.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly believe that we do lights, or at least we prep for lights on that.
Well, you gotta do.
I'm not sold on, I don't know that we need that big of a concession building. Concessions is always paying the ass, a nice restroom building, but not a $700,000. But you know, we kind of started throwing in some just trails. We got in that game of, okay, how can we get outside comfortable with it? How can we keep outside comfortable with it? There's a lot of concrete in that park. It's not necessary.
I was surprised to see all that, it looks nice.
Well,
But when it's raising the cost so much,
Yeah.
we really need that.
and then that whole kind of kids play area with the fountain, I think that could probably come out. It's great, but that's 300, 400,000 plus ongoing maintenance.
No argument for me, and my first thought was, okay, if this is supposed to be like the cool park when you come into the town center, right? 7 months out of the year, you're not gonna use that
Yeah.
water feature?
Get out. You know, and I think too, we never really got into the discussion of the retaining walls over there. You know, if we switch and have kind of the restaurant, the kind of Wrigleyville restaurant that we were thinking about on the corner,
Yeah.
should they be on the hook to build retaining walls? Maybe. It's their facility, I love it.
There's a retaining wall,
You know, so we also added 2 underpasses for the creek. So not only did we, you know, now there's no SAC recommendation, I think it's a good recommendation, but now you're taking, you know,
So is that part of the 5.8 million?
well, no, I guess in the creek it that would become open space. Yeah. And then just, and kind of, so what I did when we were working on this with Ian, I basically said, all right, we've got these 2 walkways on the creek. We're gonna go from the end of those walkways, everything in, we're gonna call that creek corridor and have that be funded by open space. Because there's that, between open space fund and then there's, you know, urban drainage is willing to give us like 500,000 for the creek work. You know, there's some things that I think we could do. If we did, let's say we did seed on part 1, but we did sod on part 2, you know, that could get rid of,
Possibly, but I'm not sure if it's gonna make that big a difference on $5.5 million.
right, it's true, that's true. So I just, yeah, really,
And that they're decent aggressive, and I just don't know how. Because usually these usually talk to, but when you called him last week, when he sent that structure, just about that, talk to him. Because he said, well, what if we go back to the developer, because we know the developer really wants to have part two. What if we tell them that maybe they're not interested in what the house parts are gonna be, like undulating, or something like that.
you're not gonna get that.
No, if we did that, it's, one, we're not being truthful, and two, what if he says, okay, we want the park, we need the park.
Yeah.
So we should be trying to play that kind of game, because then we can go all the direction that we
Well,
go.
it's just not very, I think that there's a way that we can kind of do the small, medium, large, or kind of get it to à la carte, and we can
Well-
start to pick and pull out.
That was, that's why I wanted to get the fact that the PROSTAC isn't going to say, we're going to control this, do this, then let's cut them out, and then can we do the, here's the all in, here's the mid, here's the very bare
Yeah.
bones. Open, big, open space field, you can play anything on, and then on this side, there's a big open area that has maybe hills and creeks and some concerts in the park.
Correct.
Simple enough, no terracing, no.
Well, and if you think about this too, and I was just talking to my staff a little bit after Monday, I think matrix design is significantly better than what we saw from design concepts. And, I think a lot of it was trustee Williams specifically. She really was not happy with the design concepts working more. So, when we brought on matrix, the direction was, blow this thing out, man. Like, the board has said, uninspired, not outside the box, they don't like their designs. That's why we switched vendors. So it's funny, because I almost think, if we had the design concepts one, which was nice grass area on one, buttoned up feel on two with lights, some seating mixed with kind of some hillside. It's kind of funny, I think that we probably swung so far the other way, trying to make sure that we were capturing both committees' feedbacks, appeasing a little bit of trustee Williams at the time with a whole new contractor that,
See, that's what refreshed my memory, because I remember Jeff Williams was saying that kind of stuff about, oh, we gotta have more stuff to do and stuff. And
Yeah.
she was saying that she was uninspired by that.
yeah, and that's actually what I didn't award this job to design concepts, was because, we were kind of getting, and at that time, we were getting our butts handed to us a little bit on that Eldorado part. And it was just time for us to go with the whole new design. But by the time we add in play features for kids, pavilions for this, and event performance space, those were things that weren't in that original design concept.
That's the problem, this is the problem with this board, that we caused that problem. And now we're saying that now we've got people going back and forth. So, okay, let's see, no.
Well, you guys heard us talk about it. Or back, he's trying to give us guys direction based off head nods I've known Shannon and Bill for a really long time, and we're still using them on Eldo. They were pissed that we didn't award them this job. I said, look, man, we're not getting it. We need new, inspired work. I'm going with somebody completely different. And, but that design concept plan was probably $3 to $4 million plan, but at the time it was uninspired. It wasn't outside the box. It wasn't what
Let
we
me
were
go back and
looking
see
for.
that again.
I have it.
So the stuff with the creek rehabilitation, how much of the fields, both sides, was impacted by that? So you're saying in between the trails, right? You're saying, well, there was a lot of trails that were things that were added to the city. Well,
Shoot
I would-
straight with you, I was telling her, I wanted to kind of walk this many plus open space improvement to reduce this. Now, I think that this whole thing is good. This area, get it, tear it down a little bit, all the. This can be something like, that is an insane amount of time. It's great, I love it, I would love to have kind of a thing, like performance space, but is this the project for it? You know, maybe not, maybe this is just us coordinating with the Metro District to say, well, why not do performance space up here at Town Plaza? You know what I mean? So, I think that there's some things we can do.
I think it's kind of nice to have some kind of theater, I'd rather be more natural.
Yeah, cause, you know, it got pricey, you know, parking lot is pricey. You remember, we added this whole thing right here as a way to try to accommodate this comment through here, and the board about more parking, so yeah, this wasn't originally included. None, this whole quadrant wasn't even in play. This was always part one, this was part two.
What is this gonna be without all this?
Just native open space. Remember, at one point, we talked about dog park, when we were trying to go down the dog park.
Well, I think definitely always trees, that is our, at least, maybe covered by open space, because that was, everybody was complaining about balls and things,
Yeah.
and stuff going down in, so they wanted to bury it. So that, all this, including that.
Right. See now, like right now, there's more to do on the computer now. It's awesome.
Can you put this up to this?
Yeah, I have two, I can put a little wireless connector on that one, where I have like this big 12-foot cord, so like when I'm home in the mornings, I can actually plug this into my TV and just sit there and like, or if I'm in the gym or crap on the weekend, I can just put some bed, pound out emails while I'm sitting there watching, and I can flip back and forth, watch games with that. There's a lot of stuff. There's low water crossings, all this concrete stuff. I mean, you could probably do one trip. This was a whole connect, you know, one of the ideas was, you know, this food truck alley. And this is basically just nothing but concrete plaza. This was us just trying to be inspired and make it an inspiring design.
I'm still not, I'm not a fan of food truck anything. It reminds me of, you know, high school construction.
Yep.
Food trucks.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so you can kind of see the whole material.
So the cost that we were seeing, is any of that included in the 5.1?
There might be trying to accommodate this group to put the playground feature, or kids' play features came from this group back on part two. That's what this morphed into. Well, you know, maybe that can get simplified down to more the natural creek play. And then it's kind of a log in the creek and a boulder will open out creek for our people. So there, I think there's just a lot of things we can do to kind of
The goal is to really set up the creek so people can go in there and maybe not, so if they're community park, people will go down the creek and stuff, but there's not, it wasn't designed specifically for people to go.
Right.
This would invite people to go.
in certain portions of it. We'd really discourage it in those wetland areas, but we would really encourage it down by Marshall Road.
We'd like to see where it is, because the city's going to encourage it in one area, and it's like, oh, to encourage, this is really busy here, I think it's probably down.
Well, I think with some of the planting, like Ian and I talked a lot about, we would keep the planting really kind of minimal and do lots of rock features and kind of cool areas for kids to play.
Yeah.
But then in that really environmentally sensitive area, we would do the half
It would be
areas. And it would be dense and it would be uncomfortable.
I think that's fine.
But I
think
mean-
going into creek is cool. I think it's a
Yeah,
good idea.
in a certain piece of it.
Yeah.
And I think we're gonna tear the shit out of it when we do the bridge anyway. That's given. So make that kind of the area that people can be, and then we do our environmentally sensitive areas. And we just plant the heck out of it.
Now, so you think it's easy enough for them, I think it'd be easy enough for them to separate the two parks and say,
Absolutely.
this plan that you guys saw, this is what number one is gonna cost, and here's what number two is gonna cost. And then break out each one of those spots, so the turf
Mhm.
field on number two is gonna be this.
Yep.
And then the bleachers are going to be this, but I think I already showed the bleachers.
Yeah.
So then we can say, okay, we like this, but this area that's got all these different paths coming together, we don't need that. And that's gonna reduce it by $300,000.
Well, I mean, even just looking at what would have been the concession building. You know, we kept telling them, yeah, more opening, we need more shade, we love shade. You know, but it's got a huge concession area, prep, multi-use room, 2 multi-use rooms, family unisex bathrooms, plus 3 new rooms, and just look at that. I mean, this is it's a complex design, which is great. We were saying, hey, you know, let's try to do a little bit of forecasting, do this new type, and what the bridge would potentially look like, so the curves look the same. But it's $750,000, you know.
Well, one of the reasons why when I talked to, I don't know if I talked to Randy about this at the beginning, because Randy was the possibilities of having a building there that, and this is time to like street talk about that. What's the possibility of having a building there where we can call it our clubhouse, where we have our socials afterwards, where we can cook stuff and all that? And said, well, we could do that, but we don't want to do that, because we want everybody to go to the restaurant, right? It's gonna overlook. So we should talk to Bill about that, and because we still want to have a full-on concession stand that can make business away from the restaurant.
Yeah, well, and just the conversations that I've had with my colleagues in Parks and Rec, we start doing concession, it's a good time. And you almost always try to find a vendor who will run it on your behalf. I'm along your lines of, if we're having restaurants, old Chicago, we've got a restaurant, we're gonna have food. Why do the hot dogs and popcorn and potentially tide people over when we want them to go buy those snacks or maybe a full-on meal in town? And then that kind of leads into discussions, does the town ever want to get into the whole food prep business? And that's the whole other part.
Well, what's the concession stand price and what is something that that building, what is, now what would that cost?
I think it's a prefab cinder block, simple building.
And you can do something as simple as that, that if you wanted to do concession, so as our team's hosting, like,
Mhm.
we're
Yeah, yeah, yep.
So you've got 100
mean, there's definitely things to trim up the plan.
I think we can get a little more aggressive on estimate pricing that we can stick to, bring it down, and then we have something to bring out. I think we can get both parts of it. $4.5 million people,
They're behind the sky pieces we talked about, like, to get water to hotels, to reduce water. You know, that says reduce water. Maybe those guys don't fit the bill, you run that reduce line through the park. And then it's a shared expense. And then, okay, so maybe the emphasis is on part two. Well, if we had irrigation for part one, general grading, well, why not establish with seed on part one and let it sit for a year or two and mature? You got irrigation, you got seed, it's not gonna be usable yet, but then you don't have to come in with brand new green grass. I mean, so I think there's lots of just little tweaks.
I got it.